And welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize that our intro was playing instead of Sheila's. I screwed something up and erased it, and Sheila, I apologize for that. But you're listening to the Weekend Vigilante and Hagman Report with Sheila Zielinski. We have a great show for you tonight, as all the weekend shows have been so far. Just fantastic. Lots of information, a great testimony you're going to hear tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Sheila. I'm going to let her introduce the guest and start us off. But thanks for joining us.
Yes, well, this is a very, very pinnacle show, a seminal show, if you will, folks. So again, hello, listeners, and welcome to the Weekend Report with your host, Sheila Zielinski, and the Hagmans, of course, the instigator and the investigators for this Saturday, July 26th, as Joe alluded to, and Doug will be joining us shortly. Our guest tonight, folks, is incredible. He was a radicalized Muslim willing to die for the cause of jihad until he found Jesus in 1994. So as a member of the PLO, he was involved in terror activity, was imprisoned in Jerusalem for planting a bomb, and while in America, he was recruited by the biggest kahuna for the Islamic Association of Palestine, a forerunner to today's Hamas. Today, he provides real support to imprisoned and persecuted Christians around the globe, and this gentleman has been on Sid Roth Supernatural, the BBC, John Hagee, Israeli National News, the Dennis Prager Show, Glenn Beck. I mean, you name it, America Tonight, the Jerusalem Post, WorldNet Daily, CNN. He speaks worldwide, and I would like to welcome him and his son to the program. Walid Shoebat and his son Theodore, welcome to tonight's program.
You bet. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Well, folks, I just have to say, you're going to learn a lot on this program tonight, and it really is seminal because it allows you to look at what we're going to talk about tonight through the lens of the East, not the West. And buckle up, it's going to be incredible. So, first of all, Walid, this is not some game to you. You take your role where God has you positioned very serious. So, I think it's just what's so compelling about your story is that you didn't read this, some Islamic storybook. You lived it. You're a devout Muslim willing to die for your beliefs. And when we see these Islamic terrorists like ISIS and other radical groups, holding Christian sever heads up, mocking our God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instead of praising Allah, it's pretty incredible. So God has really put you in an interesting place. So I guess the first question is, when you think about what's going on right now, and you've done a lot of end-time prophecies, and we're going to get into that, but what do you think when you see these, the Islamic terrorists holding up these heads? What's the first thing that enters into your mind?
Well, the first thing that enters into my mind was 2 decades of speaking out on the issue, saying that the issue is the destruction of the Judeo-Christian culture. And when I read the New Testament in 1993, when I read the words of the Lord Jesus Christ, that they will come to persecute you, that all the things he said, the day is coming when they come to kill you thinking they're doing God a service. They're thinking they're doing God a service by beheading these people. All these verses in the Bible, as I read them, they basically sprung to my mind immediately to understand that I was on the wrong side. But I lived between America and the Middle East. Mom and Dad, my mother was an American. She didn't understand the Middle East, very typical of the American society today. And she thought love can conquer all because she was a Christian. She married a Muslim. So here I was between mom and dad. My dad taught Islamic studies. My mother believed in her Bible. I was watching my mom all these years, couldn't exercise her faith, couldn't go to church, couldn't read her Bible. She had to secretly share with me a few verses here and there. And then I always had thought my mother was wrong, my father was right, my whole society. In fact, when my mother tried to rescue us out of the Middle East, she was caught. And the entire society brainwashed us since we were young kids that America is imperialist society, America supports the Zionists, America is evil, Christianity has been corrupted, the Bible has been corrupted. The whole goal of Islam It's not just in the school issues. People think that curriculum makes a difference. Oh, if you give them good curriculum, that they could change their minds. But the problem is the mosque, in the mosque services, in the Temple Mount, when I went to the Friday prayers, listening to Ikrimah Sabri, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the relationship of the family between my grandfather and Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was the colleague of Adolf Hitler, and he was notorious working in the Holocaust. So the history of my family stems from very much deeply rooted in Islam, deeply rooted in the society, deeply rooted in Palestinian revolution, deeply rooted in revolutionary mindset. Islam is a revolution that came to basically fight all other systems, to make the word of Allah to become dominant and to make the whole world and the whole globe subservient. When I became Christian in 1993, I began to speak about it in my local church on Sunday school, and people just couldn't fathom what I was talking about. That was in 1993, and this continued until 2001. Then September 11 hit us, and then people were calling me left, right, and center. The things you said happened. How did you know? And then it continued on until now. And I've been writing books and essays and tons of articles, tons of interviews, and trying to speak to the Americans, went globally all over the world after I converted to Christianity, to say this is a war against the Judeo-Christian culture. In fact, just today we posted a video from the ISIS who captured the regiment of Division 17 in Raqqa, Syria, in which they decapitated all 50 and posted their heads on the square, on the spikes from the fencing, all over the square there in Raqqa for the whole world to see. And the guy was talking about what? He is talking about the religion of what they call At-Tawheed, the Unitarian religion that came to denounce the Trinity. In other words, they're killing Shiites there. But the ultimate goal is to pronounce that God is a unique one. The denial of the triune deity of the Christians is the major goal of the whole Islamic revolution. It is really a war against the Judeo-Christian culture, and especially Christianity, which determines that God is triune. So this is the whole war, the whole essence of the war. When I read the Bible in 1 John chapter 2, verse 22, I was shocked to see what the God of the Bible said when he said, "Who is the liar? It is but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ. He is Antichrist that denies the Father and the Son." The denial of God being the Father and God being the Son and the Trinity and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the essence of the battle of Christendom against the Arian heresy, which continued in Islam. That's a major long history which takes decades to talk about. But now we're beginning to see firsthand on the streets in Iraq a rising caliphate. In fact, I was a pioneer in talking about the caliphate arising in the Middle East, how it intricately is involved in the Ottoman Empire, how the bruise for the Muslims when the caliphate was dismantled, how the goal and the dream of the Muslim world was to revive the sick man of Europe, to revive the Ottoman Empire, to revive the caliphate. And today we have a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. All these things we talked about, prophetically, biblically, scholarly. I see it in front of my own eyes. So when you ask me this question, I am not shocked at what I see. I am worried that will the American people finally understand the essence and the nature of this beast?
Well, and you just mentioned the USA. I mean, when you came to the United States, I mean, people have to step back and take a macro view of this. I mean, you were born in Bethlehem of Judea. You hated Jews. That's fair to say. You were a terrorist bomber. I mean, you released a bomb, and thank God no one was killed. But you wanted to. Would it be safe to say you wanted to kill Jewish people? That was absolutely the foremost thing in your mind, was that not?
Absolutely. In fact, when I took a trip in 1991 back to Israel, I was still Muslim. And I rode the car with my uncle, and I couldn't find a square meter that didn't have graffiti all over the wall. And the most major graffiti I saw was a famous slogan the Palestinians use, which says in the Arabic language, نَقْرَعُ أَبْوَابَ الْجَنَّةِ بِجَمَاجِمَ الْيَهُودِ. We knock on the gates of heaven with the skulls of Jews. So it's about killing Jews. In fact, all the demonstrations we see all across Europe, they want to burn Paris to the ground. And what are they chanting? They don't say death to the Zionists. They say death to the Jews. Period. No exception. Any Jew must die. And that's the war. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
Well, and I'm going to get into the history of Christianity's war against Islam with your son, because he certainly is a scholar. But walk us through this. I mean, again, so you came to Chicago, you were, with a group that was literally the forerunner of groups we hear about all the time, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, the rumblings in the Middle East. I mean, you were planning for jihad in America, for destruction, mayhem, slaughter. That's pretty much what you were planning for. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I went to Chicago from California. I got involved with Jamal Saeed, who was the colleague of Abdullah Azzam. And most Americans don't know. They think that the founder of Al-Qaeda was Osama bin Laden. False. The founder of Al-Qaeda is Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian from Jenin, who was a professor in Jordanian University. And he had a colleague, Jamal Saeed, who came to Chicago and began the beginning embryo in 1989, in the early 80s, and throughout the 80s.
Yeah, because most
now.
people think it's a Saudi, don't they? But you're saying a Palestinian.
No. Absolutely. Abdullah Azzam was a Palestinian. He was pre-Hamas. And this is a colleague of Abdullah Azzam, who was the godfather of Al-Qaeda in Chicago. We were training underground in basements, in hotels. We would rent hotels and just basically cover all the windows. Nobody in the outside would know what we were doing in the inside and training for the future jihad in America. Then it became the IAP, Islamic Association of Palestine, as you introduced me, which became the branch of Hamas, which gave birth to CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations. There you have it. The civil rights group that supposedly defend Muslim rights in America, that's basically a branch of Hamas. And it collaborated with the Wahhabists, with the Muslim Brotherhood. And in fact, many of their leaderships were notorious terrorists who were still in jail for charges of terrorism. So even the FBI now refuses to deal with CARE. And so, they make all these... In other words, what we have here is an embryo that creates a facade that the Muslims are mistreated in America. And then they create all these programs, lawsuits, civil rights groups, and all kinds of things to basically cover up the agenda. If they want to basically establish the idea of that we can't basically criticize Islam, the critique of Islam. This is what happened with The Innocence of Muslims, the movie. I know the whole intricacy of the movie, who was behind it, who funded it, in fact. And it relates to the Salafists in Egypt. It is very well connected globally. This is a global mechanism. It's not a local mechanism. It operates from outside. In fact, when CARE got sued, they refused to even open their books where they get their funding, which is international, which comes from outside. It comes from Islamists who basically fund. In fact, there isn't a single Muslim organization that is a major organization in the U.S. that is not linked with terrorism. Every one of them supports terrorism either spiritually, either morally, or either financially. So there's a litany of evidence there. In fact, the infiltration in this country is all the way to the top, to Hillary Clinton, with Huma Abedin, to the Muslim Brotherhood, in the CIA, in the religious institution, in the military. You have Muslim agents who basically even are in charge of recruiting Muslim clergy to basically take care of the needs of Muslim soldiers who at times throw grenades and kill Americans. And you have the same thing in the killing that happened in Texas. All that is very well interlinked together with the Islamic terrorism that is working in America.
Well, we're going to get into so much in this show. And what I love, I love something you say, and I think it's really profound, because we hear this, of course, in the spin-doctored mainstream media, or as I always call them, the lamestream media, because really these clown news network, the CNNs of the world, and others, they always spin everything. And we always hear this phrase, Walid, we heard this phrase, peace-loving Muslims. I mean, and you've said things in the past I found very interesting. You have said there's no such thing as a peace-loving Muslim Brotherhood or anything else. These, and I find that really interesting. So help our listeners understand when you say there's no such thing as peace-loving Muslim Brotherhood or Islam anything, help our listeners understand that a little bit better.
Well, jihad, really, when we talk about jihad, Muslims in America will tell you jihad is a struggle within, so on and so forth. But we have to understand the intricacies of jihad. Jihad is not just simply fighting with a sword or the explosive act, if you will. Jihad comes by three stages. There is jihad al-qalam, jihad by the pen. There is jihad al-lisan, which is jihad by the tongue, by speaking. And then comes the jihad by the sword. In fact, in all the verses in the Quran and the Hadith, every single verse in the Quran and the Hadith is about jihad through violence. In fact, even the Hadith, which many talk about, that says that Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, finally resoluted to the jihad within, doesn't exist. It's really a myth. So there is much myth. There is an alkaline that is in the Quran, which basically conceals the acid reality, such as when Islam talks about in the Quran, there is no compulsion in religion. I mean, you can't force anybody into Islam. But you find other verses, like the verse of the sword, in which it talks about finding and uprooting the people of the book, killing them wherever they find them. So the slick willies of the Islamic movement will use those alkalines, which, by the way, are considered abrogated. There is a law of abrogation in Islam. And in fact, you look at the top scholars of Islam regarding the abrogation of these verses that they use in the West. And Westerners are naive about it. They don't understand it. But nevertheless, much of these issues have been abrogated. So, we have to understand alkalines, like the Umar Declaration in Islam that talks about don't kill an elderly man or woman, don't kill a woman, don't pull out a date palm tree, so on and so forth. This is what the Muslims use. But then you go to Al-Ghazali, which contradicts everything Umar said. And Al-Ghazali says very clearly, one must go to jihad. One must go to raids at least once a year. One may use catapult against them. When they are in a fortress, even among them are women and children. One may set fire to them or drown them. If a person is Ahl al-Kitab, people of the book, Jews or Christians that is, they are to be enslaved. His marriage is automatically revoked. In other words, if you're married and you fall into the hand of the Islamists in Iraq or Syria, your husband has no jurisdiction over the marriage. It means they can have you as a concubine. This is why we see a rape epidemic. This is why we see all these things. So we must understand alkalines and acid realities. We must understand also muruna, stealth in Islam, that Islam allows people to lie. We have to look at Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. In fact, he is the grand mufti of the Islamic Sunni world, par excellence. And he talks about muruna. In fact, he has a whole legal code over muruna, which means stealth Islam, in which a Muslim girl now can marry a non-Muslim, like Huma Abedin marrying Anthony Weiner, is permissible, so long it advances the cause of Islam. Muslims can work in the banking system, so long, even though banking is forbidden in Islam, there is what they call usury, what they call riba in Arabic. So they're allowed to use usury and all these things. In other words, it is the definition of sanctioning prohibitions. Now, how can you sanction prohibitions? We have the 10 Commandments as Christians. Thou shalt not kill. How do you sanction that prohibition? Well, thou can kill. In fact, thou can kill in Islam even Muslims. If you can kill Christians and other people, and in the process Muslims will die, it's permissible under Muruna. And this is why we see Muslims killing Muslims galore in the Middle East. So we need to understand the intricacies of Islam, and not just these slick willies of the Islamic movement who they bring in Fox News to kind of give the opinion, and it's 4 minutes and what have you, and you never get really the gist of what's going on. So really people need to begin to study the full features of Islam.
Well, and I want Theodore to jump in about the history of Christianity's war against Islam and give us a really good overview of this, because really Islam, would you agree, Walid, is a mere reflection of Christianity, really, but more, I guess, a nefarious reflection, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. This is actually something that I'm very passionate about, is Christianity's war against Islam and also, of course, against all evil. When Islam was founded, see, many people have this misconception that Muhammad just founded a new religion. He just kind of took a pagan god, Allah, and he took the idol in Mecca, and he just morphed it into his own original religion. This is not entirely true. In fact, the whole truth is this. Muhammad founded his religion as a protest against what he saw as corruptions within the Christian faith. To give you an example, Muhammad's main point of contention was the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, that God is triune, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Muhammad saw this as a corruption of what he deemed as true Christianity. He believed that the true teachings of Jesus was not Trinitarianism, the belief in a Holy Trinity, but Unitarianism, the idea that God is not triune, but he is one, and that the Holy Spirit and Christ are merely separate entities and they are not divine. And he believed that Jesus Christ never saw himself as God. And he believed that the Catholic Church was the church that corrupted the scriptures in order to come up with this concept of the Trinity. Another thing that Muhammad hated was the idea of the incarnation, that God became flesh. And that is why the Quran says God is not begotten, nor does he beget. God is not born, meaning God is not one with the Son, Christ, nor does he have a son, referring to Christ also. And he also was extremely against the idea of the crucifixion, that Christ was crucified. This is why in the Quran it says, do not think he was crucified, because people only thought he was crucified. People had this hallucination that he was crucified. So really, Islam is very fascinating because it is all of the major heresies that Christianity dealt with before, all wrapped up into one package. So it is Arianism, meaning the denial of the Trinity. It is Manichaeanism, meaning the denial of the crucifixion. It is Nestorianism, in that it denies that the Holy Word, the eternal Word, Christ, became flesh in the womb of the Virgin Mary. It is all of the major heresies that the church dealt with, all wrapped up into one. In other words, it is the ultimate whore of Babylon. It harlots itself with all of the corrupt doctrines. So when Islam first came, it did not come as a separate religion that just so happened to hate Christians. Wrong. It came as a religion that deliberately came to destroy Christianity as its enemy number one. Even the idea of the Messiah it came to attack. It does not see Jesus as Messiah, but as merely prophet. And Muhammad came to be the Messiah. Muhammad believed that he was the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament. So even the idea of Christ as Messiah, Christ as Messiah who came to save who came to save humanity from its sins, is rejected in Islam deliberately. So war between Christianity and Islam was inevitable. It had to happen. There was no way you could stop it. There was no way that you could say, let's just have a dialogue and kind of create peace between the two faiths because they're just enemies and they need to get over their disagreements. No, Islam came to destroy Christianity, period. And that is the bottom line. So when we're talking about,
because of course, as you know, Theodore, Glenn Beck, the Rick Warrens of the world, they want to merge the two. But what you're saying is essentially this is a completely anti-Christ religion, not the anti-Christ
religion. Yes.
Yeah. So how could you merge?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we're going to get into that more about Glenn Beck and, of course, Rick Warren and others that are trying to fuse these two together, which is like fusing Antichrist and Christ. So that really doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
No, it doesn't, and I'm glad you brought up Glenn Beck because this is something that I have done a good amount of studying. I wrote an article last year called "Glenn Beck Converts to Chrislam." That's the exact title. You can Google Glenn Beck Converts to Chrislam, and it's the first thing that's going to come up. It was really the first and most extensive article written to expose the cult of Beck, and that's what I call it. the cult of Glenn Beck. It's a cult, and he has, in a way, magnetized this cult following in the United States till this day. The thing about Beck is that people seem to forget he's a Mormon, and he's a heretic, and so he is going to use his position as a means to preach his heretical beliefs. Now, when Glenn Beck begins to not only sympathize with Islam, but declare the God of Islam as the same God as Christianity, this is not something that he has invented. This is a teaching that is innate. It is inherent. It is natural within the Mormon doctrine. Let me explain. When Mormonism first came, when it was first incepted within America, in the 1850s, I believe in the year 1855, the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, conveyed a meeting. It was one of the earliest of the Mormon councils, and it was done purposefully and intentionally to praise the Prophet Muhammad. And you had some of the earliest pioneers of the Mormon heresy. You had, I believe, Orson Pratt and a number of other major Mormons who knew Joseph Smith personally, was there when Joseph Smith first founded the Latter-day Saints. And they said that Muhammad was a prophet of God. Not only that, but they also, the Mormon Church, when it first came out, also desired to really refute the idea that Islam was the religion of Antichrist. Because in 19th century America, it was common belief, it was very common for pastors and theologians to say that Islam was the Antichrist religion. It was a very common thing. It's only very recent that the idea that Islam is not the Antichrist religion has come about. But in the 19th century, it was very common. And Mormonism came to refute that idea. It came to refute the idea that Islam was an evil religion. And there were witnesses who knew Smith, who said themselves that Smith believed that Muhammad was a prophet of God. Not only that, but I believe in the 1830s, Joseph Smith in the state of Missouri did a very famous speech within Mormon history called the Al-Quran, the Quran, or the Sword speech. And in this speech he said that we will create a river of blood that will spread from here all the way to the Rocky Mountains. And in this generation, I will be the second Muhammad. As in his generation, it was the Quran or the sword, so in this generation, it will be Joseph Smith or the sword. And I'm saying this almost verbatim because I've read the speech so many times. So Joseph Smith declared himself to be a second Muhammad. And even till this day, the Latter-day Saints, in their website, says that Muhammad was a prophet of God and that he received God's truth, the light of God's truth. So for Glenn Beck to say in his very famous courage speech, to say, go to your church, your synagogue, and your mosque, is not something that he just came up with or thought of as a kind of a whimsical idea, very fantastical idea, but it is something that is, like I said, innate within the Mormon faith.
Well, what's staggering to me is in his Inconvenient Book, he actually says something to the effect of he has read the Quran and he can tell us that he unequivocally believes that Islam is a religion of peace. I mean,
yes,
that is absolutely complete blasphemy, really. And what does 1 Corinthians 10:21 say? You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of table of devils. So obviously, I mean, Walid, you will agree that there's no such thing as merging Christ and Islam for Chrislam like these Rick Warrens, because it's absolutely heresy and blasphemy, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. In fact, the major edict that was signed by several clergy in the U.S. With the Muslims, which is called Kalimatun Sawa, a common word. People can look it up. Kalimatun Sawa comes from the Quran. Come, O you Christians, let's have a common word between us and you, that you worship Allah alone. That means he has no son, he's not the Father, denial of the Holy Spirit, denial of the Trinity. And all these Christians signed it, and thinking that this is just basically a peace edict. And then you have Rick Warren going to Muslim organizations, giving speeches how much he loves Muslims and so on and so forth, and everything is hunky-dory. But they don't understand. This is a covenant with death, because once you sign such a covenant, you basically are allowing the denial of the Trinity. You're saying that we worship the same God, number one. You apologize for the Crusades. You apologize for the war on terror. You apologize for all the suffering Muslims did. But on the other side, there is no apology if the Muslims have done anything in Christendom. The greatest persecutor of Christendom has been the Muslims. There's no more bloodshed amongst the Christians than from Muslims, especially the Ottoman Empire. And we can give millions of numbers and statistics what happened to the Armenian genocide, the massacre of Smyrna. I could still show you even piles of heads, even in black and white, in which the Muslims decapitated in Smyrna. And, this is one of the last churches in the book of Revelation. What happened to the church of Smyrna? What happened to the 7 candlesticks, the 7 churches? They've all been gulped up in Turkey by Islam. So it is Islam that basically began to take over Christendom and began a war all the way to Italy. In fact, Theodore can even chime in and tell you about the history of Islam in Europe, the wars, the battles of Poitiers, the battles, the great naval battles, so on and so forth, of what Islam did. Maybe Theodore, you want to chime in?
Sure thing. Well, like I said when I first began talking, is that Islam came to destroy Christianity. It came to strip Christianity of many of its beliefs in order for the faith to restore itself back to what he believed is true Christianity. Kind of like how Mormons believe that they have the true form of Christianity, what Jesus really meant. Same thing can be said for the Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults. So with that said, that's really my introduction to come to my conclusion, and that is war between Christianity and Islam is inevitable. It is something that cannot be stopped and will not stop until kingdom come, because of the deliberate hatred that Islam has for Christianity and its orthodox beliefs. And so you go back and you say, okay, what were the earliest wars that were fought within Christian history? And you go back and you find out that when after Muhammad died, the Muslims began to expand into Syria and also into Egypt and Iraq. And that is when war between Christians and Muslims began. The war between Christians and Muslims did not begin in the Crusades in the Middle Ages in the year 1097. That is a mistake. The Crusades really began, between Muslim and Christian that is, really began in the early 8th century between Christian and Muslim. And that began between the Greek Christians, Byzantine Empire, and also the Muslims. And this happened when they began to invade the Middle East. When the Muslims invaded Egypt in the early 7th century, I would say, I think within the late 7th century or so, or 8th century, my mistake. I'm getting the dates confused, but it's very close to the time of Muhammad's death. When the Muslims invaded Egypt, they did not go in there immediately with weapons and begin to kill people at random. They first introduced themselves to the Egyptian Christians, and they said, "We are people like you, and we believe in one God like you." So the Muslims did not invade a nation with weapons. They invaded a nation with theological deception, is my point. In other words, they invaded with Chrislam. And they said, "We worship one God like you." And the Egyptian Christians said, well, if they believe in one God like us, where is the harm done? And so the Muslims entered Egypt, and they began to establish their own communities, and they began to multiply and multiply and multiply. And what happened is that the Egyptians began to favor the Muslims over the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was still controlling Egypt at that time, and the native Egyptians wanted no more of it. And so the Muslims said, well, if you give us money every year, we will rule over you, and we will defeat the Romans. So the Egyptians began to give them a large amount of money every year, and then the Muslims began to commenced military conquest over the Egyptians and ultimately began to suppress the Christian religion. And when the Christians said, "Why are you invading us? Why are you suppressing us? I thought we were supposed to be friends." It's a very famous story that one of the Muslim military leaders looked at the Christian who was saying this and said, "Do you see that giant pillar over there?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Swallow the pillar." And he says, "It's impossible. I cannot swallow this pillar." He says, "So it isn't. Neither can we leave Egypt." And so they remained in Egypt, and the Romans came into Egypt, and they had a battle that lasted for a number of weeks, and the Romans were defeated, and they were driven out, and the Muslims invaded Egypt. And once they invaded Egypt, they began to carry out the Pact of Omar, which says that no new churches could be built. If a Muslim destroys a church, you cannot repair it. Crosses are outlawed. Public presentation or public processions for Christian holidays are outlawed. It's really the I guess you could say it's the ACLU utopia in ancient form, and they really, that was the beginning of the suppression of Christianity, and the suppression of Christianity in Egypt is there in Egypt till this day. So how did this happen? It happened through theological deception, and that is what the Muslims are doing in America, thanks to with the help of Glenn Beck and Rick Warren and other corrupt Christian leaders. So that's why I say it's very important that we understand why Islam is here. Islam is not here so we can have this very beautiful way to worship God. Islam is here to destroy the Christian faith. And
well,
so
speaking of deception, I mean, what's really interesting to me, it's not just Glenn Beck and Rick Warrens of the world. It's also someone who is appointed to be the leader of our country, too. Barack Hussein Obama, Mr. claims he's a Christian. And, I mean, you were on a Chicago radio station, and you mentioned that our commander-in-chief is a Muslim, and you got relegated to the depths of the damned, and those are the nice ones, Walid. I mean, this was absolutely staggering that these people were asking you questions, then you get on there and say, well, this is what I see, and you were really quite, well, I doubt they ever invited you back to talk about it. But get into this thing with Barack Hussein Obama. First of all, my understanding is the word Hussein is never given as a second name to somebody that is not Muslim. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's one of the names of Muhammad. Muhammad has several names of Mustafa, Hussein, Muhammad, Ahmad. It's one of the names, it's proudly given to children. And his father's name is Hussein, very Muslim. In fact, even his uncle, Saeed Obama, I have a video clip in which he talks, and he says, nobody in the Obama family is not Muslim. That is including the president. This is in the Arabic language, of course. It doesn't transfer to the English until I capture it and show it to the American people. You have President Obama, New York Times. He said the most beautiful sound he's ever heard is the call to the prayer. Well, what is the call to the prayer? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allah is great, Allah is great. Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah. I declare there is no God but Allah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I declare Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. That's the statement of faith of Islam, conversion to Islam. Once you even recite and believe it. But he says this is the most beautiful sound he's ever had. So, okay, let's see. A Christian convert from Islam says that the call to the prayer, declaring the decree of Islam, is the most beautiful sound he's ever heard. How does that make any sense? I became Christian. I don't declare God as Allah and Muhammad is his messenger any longer. Where is his testimony? Can somebody here show me his testimony? If I suspected President Obama was a Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, New Ager, whatever, Buddhist, Shinto, nobody would say anything. But if I acquire information that President Obama is Muslim, oh boy, how dare you? How dare you equate the President of the United States with the religion of peace? Well, that should be a compliment, shouldn't it? If you have Malik Obama, his brother, his elderly brother, he raises funds from the U.S., he has a 501c3, and he dons the kafiyah of Hamas openly. We have that on a photo. People can see it. And Israel is from the river to the sea. There is no state of Israel. And he sits in the White House, and he collaborates with the IRS, and the IRS loses its emails somehow miraculously. And, of course, he's been granted his status from the influence of President Obama. Why would they give this guy a 501c3, especially when he supports terrorism? He works for the government of Sudan. The government of Sudan is considered a terror entity. So his family, even his grandmother, even his cousin Musa Ismail Obama. I was the first in the country to show interviews with Al Jazeera television in which he's a Muslim scholar recruiting under 501c3, where 90% of these monies that are funded is recruitment to send African Muslims to the most virulent Wahhabi schools in Saudi Arabia. One of them is Al-Qura University. It's the #1 Wahhabist pro-terror university par excellence in the Sunni Muslim world. These are not small issues. These are on tape. This is confessions by the own family. This is not just some accusation by me, So you get it from the horse's mouth, from the family itself. So there's plenty of evidence that President Obama has always been sympathetic with Muslims. What's he doing against Bashar al-Assad, helping the Islamists in Syria, helping the Islamists in Libya, helping the Islamists in Egypt. This is no mystery. In fact, he wanted to make it illegal in America. There's no room in America for anybody who blasphemes the Prophet. Hello?
Well, and there's lots of talk about the head of Homeland Security being a Muslim as well, and very integral positions within the U.S. framework being Muslims.
Yes, I've heard of this. There's been from officials in the FBI, I believe, somebody in the FBI stated that. We don't have absolute evidence to it, but nevertheless, he's been very complimentary. He's spoken Arabic language. He's very complimentary of Islam, but he never, stated he was Muslim. So we can suspect that he's very sympathetic to Islam, at least. But, he is a suspect to have been convert to Islam. And so we have this happening in a very top official in the CIA, in the government, in the military. This goes on left, right, and center in this country.
But it's not surprising, really, when you look at the globalist connection to the kind of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Jihad, all these connections. Because look at the Grand Mufti, the Islamic people. Their chief spiritual leader was received by Hitler too. So all these connections aren't probably really surprising to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Hajj Amin al-Husseini, he was my grandfather's friend. He was in our house. He was collaborating. He was a Muslim Brotherhood member. And in fact, he twisted the arm of the Hungarian prime minister not to allow thousands of Jewish children to go to Israel, who all of them ended in the oven. He's the one that basically prescribed to the Nazis how to use trains from the genocide of the Armenians. So they mimicked the genocide of the Armenians in Nazi Germany. It was the Muslims who taught the Nazis how to use these trains. It wasn't just no accident. It was Hajj Amin al-Husseini who basically recruited 2 divisions out of the 8 divisions of the Nazi war machine. The Nazi war machine constituted 8 divisions. 2 of them were Muslim fundamentalists, Al-Khanzar division and the Bosnian division, Albanian division. And you have notorious burning of churches, killing. They were the most notorious Nazis. The most notorious Nazis were Muslims. People forget that. They don't understand the intricacy between Nazism and Islam. In fact, Adolf Hitler himself stated, how much he wanted the religion of Islam to be the religion of the fatherland, of Deutschland, of Germany. He did not want the flabby Christian religion. It was too flabby for him. It was too peaceful for him. So, Hitler himself attributed to Islamic concepts. There's much connection between Nazism and Islam in history.
Well, we see the Jews with their patch on their right shoulder. That's actually that's not a German thing, is it?
No, actually not. It came from the Omar Declaration. In fact, the Omar Declaration is the declaration I basically quoted a few lines from at the beginning of the program. Don't kill, don't do this, don't do this. But if you look at the Omar Declaration regarding the treatment of Jews, Jews cannot be, and Christians as well, cannot be judges in a Muslim court. Jews must put a yellow patch on their right shoulder. That came from the Muslims. That is as old as, 700 AD. I mean, this is way ancient. It's way pre-Nazi Germany. So this marking on the shoulder with the yellow patch that the Jews had to do, and they put the Star of David, of course, on it, in Nazi Germany is reminiscent to what happened in Islam. They cannot adopt German children, Aryan children. The same thing in Islam. Jews cannot adopt Muslim children, so on and so forth. They cannot be a judge in a Muslim court. The same thing in Nazi Germany. They cannot be a judge in a German court. They must live in ghettos. They must live in ghettos. If you look at the Edict of Umar Declaration versus the Nazis, you find it to be absolutely very, very similar. In fact, almost the same.
So, in other words, a German cannot eat, a Jew cannot eat in a German restaurant. There's a ton of edicts, isn't there?
Yeah, look at the marking. What happened in Mosul? This has happened just last week. You have the Muslims putting the marks of N, Nazarene, following of the Nazarene religion, followers of the Nazarene Jesus. So they put the letter N, they put property of the Islamic Caliphate, on the houses of all the Christians in Mosul. The same thing happened in Nazi Germany, where the Nazis marked Jewish properties, Jewish businesses. Everything is the same that's happening in front of our eyes. In fact, there's no Christians left in Mosul. They're all been extradited, and the world is basically silent. And so you have 20,000 families basically evicted from their homes, taken over by the Islamic Caliphate. This is reminiscent to what happened in Nazi Germany, except this is much worse, because if the Caliphate spreads into Turkey, into Malaysia, into major Muslim countries, you have a major problem. You don't have a one Nazi Germany to deal with. You could have potentially 50 Nazi Germanys to deal with. Right. You have Pakistan, another Nazi Muslim Germany to deal with nuclear. They have nuclear weapons, 100 warheads. So, we're talking about a major nuclear fiasco that could take place.
Well, and I'm so springboarding. I know what's burning on everyone's mind right now, and I will get into the prophetic. Like, you actually wrote an incredible book, God's War on Terror, and you talk a lot about Bible prophecy being on fire, and particularly the rumblings in the Middle East and how that relates to Bible prophecy. But what's burning on everyone's mind, I know, is, and I think it's a fascinating story, how did you come to convert to Jesus Christ from basically a radical terrorist Islamic bomber? Tell our listeners that.
Well, basically, when I read the Bible, the intricate things of the prophetic language that was in the Bible was very intriguing to me. Even the coming of Christ himself. We read the verses where it says Christ, he lands on the Mount of Olives in Zechariah. Most Christians, you ask in America, when you say Christ, where does he, when he comes to earth, where does he go? They say, well, he lands on the Mount of Olives. But they don't pay attention to the other verses. Isaiah 19, the Lord comes riding in a swift cloud and is coming into Egypt. Christ is coming to Egypt. God himself is coming down to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will totter before him. In fact, the believers in Egypt will call for a Savior, and God will send them a Savior and a mighty one. That's in Isaiah 19. Who is this mighty one? Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one. God comes down to earth. I never heard of such a concept. This is supposed to be a false concept. And then there he comes to Egypt. Well, what religion is Egypt? Muslims. So what's Christ doing fighting Muslims? Habakkuk chapter 3, there he fights Midian. Midian is the brother of Ishmael. That's Arabia, the Al Jazeera, we call it, the Arab island, all the desert countries. And then in Lebanon, he comes to fight Lebanon, and also Isaiah, Lebanon shall fall by the mighty one. I believe it's Isaiah chapter 11. And then you have all the verses where Christ is on earth fighting. He is fighting a Muslim nation. In fact, in the famous Zechariah chapter 9, he goes to fight Greece, Yavan, Ionia. Where is that? Ayawan or Ionia is in Turkey. He comes to fight Turks. In fact, he says he goes with the whirlwinds of the south. He's coming from Israel. From the south, where is he going? North. What's north of Israel? Turkey. In fact, if you look at every single reference, it was shocking to me. In fact, I asked that to every American Christian. I say in every single reference where a nation is mentioned by name that God deals with in the ends of times, whether Christ is on earth or pre-Christ coming to earth, is always a Muslim country. Every single name of any country he deals with is Muslim. In fact, even the casting of the nations into the pit. Ezekiel chapter 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Then you go to 38. They talk about Ezekiel 38, but they forget Ezekiel 28. and 29 and 30 and 31, and there he deals with Lucifer, the Antichrist, in chapter 28. He casts him into the pit. Then he casts other nations. In chapter 30 of Ezekiel, there's Lydia, which is Turkey, Libya, North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Mauritania, Egypt, Muslim country. Then you continue to chapter 31, 32, and there is every single nation, and the Arabs, Gomer, Bet Togarma, all in Asia Minor, the Turks, the southern republics of Russia. You have every single country, Syria, Iraq, Syria. It's amazing. It's quite amazing. Every single nation is Muslim. So now I begin to look at the prophetic, word from a different angle. I look at it from a Middle Eastern perspective. It's a Middle Eastern book. It's written from a Middle Eastern mindset. And there it deals with the Trinity, and there's Christ also in Ezekiel, in Isaiah, I believe, Isaiah 28, he deals with the Trinity. I have not spoken in secret. From the time that it was, I was there, and now the Lord God and His Spirit have sent me, God the Father, and the Holy Spirit have sent me, the Son, the Messiah, the Trinity even in one verse. It was shocking to me. Then you get to the book of Revelation, it talks about the harlot of Babylon. And there John talks about the angel taking him where? To a desert, not to Rome, to a desert location. Rome is not in a desert. And there he shows him a woman riding on a scarlet beast. And then it says, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. The same reference, the same rendering that is in Revelation 18 and in Revelation 14 exists in Isaiah 21. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. But there in Isaiah 21, it doesn't refer to Rome. It refers to Arabia. The burden against Arabia. Now, does that need any interpretation? So I was shocked. This is not a historical event. People think it's an historical event in which the Babylonians, invaded Arabia. It never happened in history. This is basically the Bible. I began to understand that the biblical prophecies really are regarding all times. It has basically waves of fulfillments. It has dualities. It has layers. So it is selfish of us to think that when Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, all what Christ was talking about is the end times. Sure, it's focused on the end times, but he's talking about all times in which, with the Bible warned, when you see the invasion of Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. The Christians fled, and they were saved. And what happened? The remnants there, the Jewish population, were crucified and killed and murdered in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. So Christians followed prophecy from time immemorial in the same fashion as we follow it now. So we have to look at prophecy from a different lens, that it has many multiple layers.
Well, and it's just so fascinating that you go to prove that the Bible has been corrupted to your wife, time for her to get converted to Islam, and you set out to prove its corruption. The Quran is the truth, and you're going to prove this to your wife. But what actually happened is, kind of the opposite. It's really interesting that you set out to prove it wrong, and yet you realize this thing is the truth. So that's really
man thought he was smart, A man thought he was smart, but my wife says, show me the corruptions. And by the time I looked for the corruptions, I ended up concluding woman was smarter. So she didn't have to argue with me. She said, just find the corruptions. I'll be glad to convert to Islam. And so that made me read the Bible. And so I was basically, the Word of God doesn't return void. It's an edge to a sword. I mean, it's impossible. I read it, and I just became addicted to it. I made a deal with God. I said, God, the God of heaven and earth, I'll make a deal with you. If you show me the truth, where the corruptions are, I will do your will in my life, and I will follow you till the ends of my life. I should have never made that following statement there, but I did. And between me and God, a deal is a deal, so here I am continuing.
Well, and I think what's really important for people to understand, I mean, you guys really, take this very serious, and you're really sticking your neck out. And, Islamic terrorists, they take their jobs, for lack of a better word, very serious. I mean, they're going to fly in a building, and blow it up. I mean, this is a very serious thing. Death to America, death to whatever it is, death to the Jews. I mean, they take their religion, and I mean, something you said really stuck in my mind because, American in the West are always talking, oh, we're all one, Allah, Jehovah, the Mormonism and the Buddhism. It's all, kumbaya, one religion. But one of the things you said years ago in an interview that always stuck in my mind was, okay, grab your little sign and march down to Mecca and see how you make out with your one world religion, all gods are one. Explain that to people, Walid. I thought it was very fascinating.
Well, there is a sign going to Mecca in Saudi Arabia that says, لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ فَقَط, only Muslims. And there's an exit. You better take that exit. If you don't, and you continue on going to Mecca, carrying your little placard, saying we all worship the same God, Buddha, Allah, whatever, and you carry your sign, you reach to Mecca, by the time, they see the sign in your hand, you will have basically a sword slice your head off. And they have in Saudi Arabia chop square. I mean, if you don't have any protection, if you're not a U.S. citizen, maybe even if you are a U.S. citizen and mobs see you there carrying such a placard that we all worship the same God, be killed on the square. So, it is extremely dangerous to think that we all worship the same God and Islam is a peaceful religion. My question to everyone, was Muhammad following the peace religion of Islam when he used the Hudaybiyah Treaty and took over Arabia? And after him, Umar ibn al-Khattab began to advance into Christian Byzantine territory? Do these analysts really who say Islam is a peace-loving religion want to talk about my mother, who upon her moving to the Holy Land to only become a captive of Islam, she too was clueless how every Muslim is educated on the importance of the decisive battle of Yarmouk in August 636, when the Christian emperor Heraclius was defeated by the Islamic hordes. Were they practicing the religion of Islam, peaceful Islam? Were Muslims far from following the peaceful religion of Islam when Sophronius, the Christian Arab, from my village Bethlehem on the day of the Epiphany in 636 AD, he bewailed the destruction of the churches and monasteries, how the sacked towns, the fields laid waste. Is Saudi Arabia and Qatar following the peaceful religion of Islam when they send incursions into Syria of replicas of the same ancient savages, beheading Christians, raping, burning, and destroying everything in sight? And now the American Christian is unaware that he would take the side of such savages in full support of the so-called Free Syrian Army, when President Obama supported the Free Syrian Army, which basically evolved into something else later on. You have al-Nusra and everything else. Now you have the ISIS beheading people left, right, and center. Were Muslims not following the peaceful religion of Islam when Arabia made its conquest in Christian Syria in 637? But, I could go on through the whole history. The entire history of Islam is reeked with blood and skulls. We are a people, we used to say as Muslims, we are a people who build our fortresses of the skulls of the enemies we defeated. I know what Islam was. I was one. It was. I could show you pictures of skulls, fortresses forts made out of skulls. The beheadings of multitudes, 60 to 80 million in India alone. There's the biggest Holocaust in history of mankind. Started when Muslims killed the Hindus in India. So we can go on, not just Christians, even Hindus.
Well, you're right, and you're right. You said something very important. The Middle East is aflame right now. I mean, this ISIS from Syria to Iraq has really rattled America, and we're going to get into that after we go to the break here, and we're going to get into the prophecy. And I really thought this was a very fascinating book that you wrote, God's War on Terror. So just jump in here, Doug and Joe. I mean, I know we're at the top of the hour, and then we can go to
Sheila,
the break.
You're doing a great job in Walid about how you were told to read the scriptures and point out the inconsistencies. You did it in a way where, some people read the Bible for ammunition, some people read it to back up their own ideas of how things are. But what your story you just told tells me you read it with a heart of wanting to understand, and I wish more people would read the Bible with that same attitude, because so much would be revealed to them, and we would see such an increase of growth in Christians. And it's inspiring to hear other stories that are like yours, and I appreciate it so much. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on this Saturday, July 26, 2014. This is the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante and with Sheila Zielinski and Hagman and Hagman. Only one Hagman right now, but my father, Doug, will be here shortly. We're going to go to a break. We will be right back after these short messages. Stay with us.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special weekend edition. It's the Weekend Report featuring Sheila Zielinski, the Weekend Vigilante. Folks, visit theweekendvigilante.com, visit our website. It's on the right-hand side of HomelandSecurityUS.com. Right now, as we speak, you can one click, it'll take you right to our website, and there you'll have it, as well as our very special guest, Mr. Walid Shoebat. His website as well is connected directly to HomelandSecurityUS.com. Use that. Go ahead and make a one-click move over there. Explore his website. Just an extremely valuable website as well. Sheila, hi.
Well, hello, Doug. And hey, listeners, if you're just joining us again, it's your host, Sheila Zielinski, and Doug Hegman here with our friend Walid Shoebat, who was a radicalized Muslim willing to die for the cause of jihad until he found Jesus in 1994. So, think about that, hey? Here's this PLO involved in terror activity, Doug, and prison for, in Jerusalem for planning a bomb. I mean, this guy was, he's with the group that was essentially a forerunner to today's Hamas. So how interesting that we have someone who is now, able to provide us, didn't just read a book on the subject, lived it, and can actually give our listeners a real insider's view of really what's going on. And one of the things that I found so fascinating about Walid is that he has mentioned, again, over and over and over on various, whether it's with John Hagee or Sid Roth's prophecy, he's always talking about how this plays out in the end-time prophecy. So, Walid, and I'd like both you, of course, and your son, Theodore, to really get into how prophecy is on fire. It's really unfolding, and how the Middle East is really, we see it all over the prophecy, from Mark of the Beast to, how this plays out. Get into that for our listeners, please.
Well, sure. Maybe we can take what's going on today with the caliphate. In Mosul, we have seen the Caliph al-Baghdadi being pronounced, and people were giving him what is called bay'ah, allegiance, and he's called the Prince of the Faithful. So he's given the title of the Prince, and he's given allegiance by the multitudes. In fact, in my website, I show videos on how they give allegiance by raising the right hand and their index finger, in which they say there is no God but Allah, and then the index finger means Allah is a unique one, the denial of the Trinity, and they put badges on their foreheads. When we read Daniel, it talks about the Prince who is to come. It talks about giving allegiance. So it's very much, when you read the book of Daniel, the book of Revelation, or Isaiah, or any prophetic book, you see these things. If you were Muslim, you would see it very clearly that is speaking about the religion of Islam and the Muslim people. There is confusions, of course, in Daniel chapter 9 by many Westerners, in which they think the prince who is to come is basically the Roman Empire, basically secluding Europe being part of the Antichrist system, when in fact the Roman Empire was much bigger than that. It wasn't just only Europe, it included North Africa, Muslim today. The eastern leg of the Roman Empire was Turkey, Muslim today. So they insist that the Antichrist comes from the West, but there's no reference in the Bible that he comes from the West. Of course, not to get into Daniel 9 and the confusion there, we look at the rest of the Bible. It is really about giving allegiance to a beast, a government system, a threat. What is a beast? It's a threat. A threat to who? To the church. A threat to the believers. There's a threat coming. It revives from the dead. One of the heads was wounded. It comes back to life. Islam was wounded when? When the dismantlement of the caliphate happened in the early 1900s, when the Christians of the West basically gave a bruise to Islam and they dismantled the caliphate. So it must rise from the dead where it was dismantled, and that is in Turkey. And so Turkey is in the Bible, mentioned in warfare with Christ in Zechariah chapter 9 in the Bible, mentioned in Ezekiel 30 as Lydia in the Bible, mentioned by Jesus Christ himself. Pergamum, thou art the seat of Satan. The seat of the Antichrist, or the seat of the devil on earth, is in Pergamum. Well, today that is in Turkey. So Turkey plays a major, intricate role. I've been saying this for 2 decades. When Turkey was a peaceful nation that had deals with the U.S. and had deals with Israel and basically was pro-Israel, and today what do we see? We see Erdogan of Turkey rising and saying Jerusalem is the apple of the eye of every Muslim. Has he been reading the book of Zechariah the prophet? Jerusalem is the apple of God's eye, not every Muslim's eye. And so there they want to establish a hegemony throughout the Middle East. They call it the Turkish model. Turkey is a Sufi Muslim country. It has the ability to unite with Persia because they adore the icons of the Shiites. They're not like the Wahhabis. We see today a war between Shia and Sunni because of disagreements over who inherits the caliphate. And there you have Turkey can unite all these fractured parties, and they're talking about making peace resolutions between Shia and Sunni, and Erdogan is leading the way. And so we see in the Bible, throughout the scripture, all these things written in detail. As I mentioned, Ezekiel 28 to 39, very clear, talking about the reference of Islam. When the Bible talks about chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, this is Gog. Many believe that Gog is separate.
Yeah, that's in 38, is it not? The coming of the last World War. It talks about Gog and Magog. Is that correct?
Correct. But the confusion is they think that the battle of Gog and Magog is a separate battle from Armageddon. But when you look at it, it talks about God being in Israel, the Holy One in Israel. During that battle, the Holy One is in Israel. Throughout the whole verses in the Bible is the Holy One of Israel. There's only one verse in the Bible. The Holy One is in Israel, and that's in Ezekiel 39. Continuation of Ezekiel 38. Gog is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal.
And Tubal, yeah.
That's right, and that's not Moscow and Tobolsk. That is Mushki and Tabalani. I'm from the Middle East. We know where Mushki is and Tabalani is. It is in Turkey. It is in Asia Minor. And so you look at the other nations, Beit Togarma, Gomer, and so on and so forth. Those are all in the southern republics of Russia. In fact, if you look at every historian that deals with these nations, these entities mentioned in Ezekiel 38, and they give the references historically, all of them, no exception, refer to the southern republics of Russia. If you take Hal Lindsey's book, or any book you like, where they talk about Russia being Gog and Magog, and they use historical reference.
Oh, Joel Rosenberg, how about that one?
All of them. Read any historical reference they use. If you look at the historian makes correct quotes, and he says the southern republics of Russia. They assume that the southern republics of Russia migrated to Russia proper, when the southern republics of Russia are entirely different kind of people. They're not Scandinavians, they're not Slavic, they're different people. They're Turkic people. And so if you look at the history itself, look at any historical reference, look at any map of the Bible, any map you like, whether the Macmillan Bible Atlas, the Moody Bible Atlas, the Encyclopedia of Bible Lands, all of them show Magog, Meshech, Beit Togarma, the nations of Ezekiel 38 in Asia Minor and the southern republics of Russia. They didn't migrate to north. They remained there. In fact, when the communism fell, what happened? They became the CIS nations, the Commonwealth of Independent States. They are all Muslim, and they're separated from Russia. So now we see the truth, and now everybody is going back to the chalkboard to try to figure out where they went wrong. They all went wrong. Then they have mistakes about the European Union. They thought the European Union was the Antichrist. So when Greece joined as the 10th nation in the early 80s, they said, well, this is it. We have the 10 nations. But now we have over 25, 26, 28 nations joining the European Union. So how many toes are in the statue of Daniel? 20-some toes in the right foot, but the left foot, the eastern leg, has no toes whatsoever? How does that make any sense? It's 5 from both toes. But if you look at North Africa, which is mentioned in the Bible under Put or Foot, and Libya, that's North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Mauritania, there are 5 states right there who are on the western part of the Roman Empire. So you cannot revive a Roman Empire and ignore what the Bible mentions as Put and Foot, and they join with Persia, and they join with Turkey in Ezekiel 38, and they are also in Ezekiel 30. In Ezekiel 30, sets the record straight. Ezekiel tells us who the nations are that are involved in Ezekiel 38. He mentions Persia. He mentions Libya, the same nations mentioned in Ezekiel 38. But in Ezekiel chapter 30, he adds Lydia, which is Turkey, and no scholar of the Bible and no historian in the world can disagree that Lydia, with a D, not a B, Lydia, is Turkey, no other than Turkey. Yavan, Ionia, mentioned by name in the Bible, mentioned by name with the battle with Christ himself. So here they are, ignoring all the literal references, simply starting prophecy at the end of the book in Revelation and trying to understand Revelation without looking at the literal references given to us by all the prophets of the Bible. So we don't study Revelation standalone. What we need to do hermeneutically is to apply the literal references of the Bible, superimpose them on Revelation, then we get a much better picture of what Revelation and what John was speaking of when he talked about the harlot of Babylon and Arabia in Isaiah and so on and so forth, Mecca, Kaaba. Today, if I ask anybody, where is Babel? They will say Babel is a historic location in Iraq. It's destroyed. Well, if you ask an Arab today where is Babel, they will tell you Babel is in Mecca. On Mecca, on Babel, there was a very recent building. It is the largest building in the world, literally larger than the tallest building on earth. And it is composed of 7 buildings reminiscent to the towers of Babel. The towers of Babel were on top of each other. This one is next to each other, overlooking Mecca. It houses the pilgrims in Kaaba. It also looks at the moon and gazes at the stars and so on and so forth. Very reminiscent to Babel. And what is the story of Babel? Let's speak in one language. Let's go to build us a city. They all went to pilgrimage to that city. They all left their languages and spoke that one universal language. Islam, a religion, you cannot worship Allah unless you speak that universal language, the Arabic language. And what did they do? They said, let us take everything we have. So they take pitch and bricks. Hello, what are the Muslims doing in Arabia today? Let's take everything we have. What do they have? Pitch, petroleum. And let's build us a name. And that's exactly what the Muslims are doing, using the petrodollar and so on and so forth to export Islam. If we get into the Bible, in Jeremiah, in Revelation, we look at the city and the sailors looking far off, weeping and wailing, Alas, Alas, that great city there in the Red Sea. Jeremiah tells us, I heard the noise of her destruction on the Red Sea. Not the Sea of Marmara, not the Mediterranean Sea, but the Red Sea. That city is by the Red Sea, exactly where Mecca is located today.
What an intellectually stimulating.
That's really interesting.
I didn't mean to talk over you, Sheila. I'm sorry. I just want to say what an intellectually and historically stimulating dissertation by Walid Shoebat, and folks, what a treat to have him on. Sheila, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, him and his son, absolutely incredible information. So you kind of give us an overview of Ezekiel 38, the Battle of Gog and Magog, and you mentioned that, Gomer, Libya, Persia, Ethiopia, Tegama is in there as well, but you also mentioned burning pitch. So we're assuming Arabia will be burning literally then. God will destroy Arabia. Would that be fair to say?
Well, that's what you said is in the Bible. Read Isaiah chapter 30, I believe, in which it talks about Edom. It shall become burning pitch. It shall never be quenched day or night. Its burning will ascend forever. It will be burned, the petrol, burning pitch. Zifet in Hebrew is petroleum, and in the English translated correctly as pitch. And where is this Edom? This Edom is not Jordan. In fact, in Ezekiel 25, I believe, God proclaims it. God says, I have stretched out my arm against Edom and made it desolate. From Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword. Where is Teman? Yemen. Where is Dedan? Arabia. No scholar disagrees. Dedan is Arabia. And where is God's arm? God says, I will stretch out my arm. That's how important this event is, that God will stretch out his arm. Who is God's arm? Let's look at the Bible. Isaiah chapter 53. 53 tells us, what's the first verse in 53? Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? To whom has the Messiah, Jesus, been revealed? Hello, it's very much talking about Christ proclaiming judgment on Arabia, destroying it and burning the oil. And he tells us even which nation destroys it: Iran. It is in Isaiah 21. In fact, I was one of the only Bible prophecy teachers who said Israel is not going to invade Iran in this time, because Iran will build its nukes. I've been saying this for 10 years and beating every scholar out there. I was right. They were all wrong. Why? Because I read my Bible.
Well, as you know, Joel Rosenberg, years ago I read a book called, it was kind of about the rumblings in the Middle East, and he had predicted, I think the book was Epicenter, and he talked about Gog and Magog, and of course, as you know, you actually had quite a sort of back and forth. Tell our listeners a little bit about what he was proclaiming and the fact that he wouldn't even really debate you, would he?
No, none of them will debate me, not Hal Lindsey, not him, not others. In fact, there was one, I forgot his name, very well known in the Christian circles, who I prayed to God to sit next to me in a plane, and we had a 2-hour discussion on these issues. They all believe the same things, that Gog, Magog is Russia, and that the Antichrist is the European Union. And so I sat next to this prophecy scholar, and I said, we're going to have an interesting 2-hour flight, and we're going to have an interesting 2-hour conversation in which I will ask you questions, and the only thing you're going to say is, let's see, you're going to say Daniel chapter 9 and Daniel chapter 2, the iron leg is Rome, and Daniel chapter 9, the prince to come is from the Roman Empire. I says, okay, the Antichrist, where does it come from? He says, Europe. I said, how do you know that? Well, in Daniel chapter 9, it says, I said, do you have anything besides Daniel chapter 9? He doesn't. When I read the whole Bible with him, 2 hours, I went through all the verses, where the threat comes from, all the nations that are mentioned, where Christ fights, who the nation Christ fights, who the harlot is, everything. I said, now, what do you do with all this stuff? You're just going to quote me Daniel chapter 9, that Roman Empire being Europe? The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city of Jerusalem. Well, we know the people who destroyed Jerusalem. The people who destroyed Jerusalem, sure, there were inscriptions in the Roman army, but they were not Italians. They were not Europeans. They were 4 cohorts. That was in Legion 10. Cohort Arabia, hello, Arabs. Cohort Petranium, Arabs. Cohort Syria. Cohort Thracia, Turks. Turks, Syrians, and Arabs were the ones who burned the temple in Jerusalem. What the Bible is saying, the people of the Antichrist who is to come 2,000 years later, those are the people who will destroy the city. In fact, if you look at Daniel 9, boy, it's telling us where the Antichrist comes from. Turkey, Syria, that region. We look at all the Christian scholars, from Sophronius to the martyrs of Cordova to, I can name 12, 3 dozens. In fact, Martin Luther himself, when he talked about the beast, it comes from Islam, the Ottoman Empire, so on and so forth. So if you look at the oldest teachers of prophecy, Sir Robert Anderson, one of the geniuses of Bible prophecy, who wrote The Coming Prince, when he talked about Persia, the bear rising on one side, he says this never happened in history. Medo-Persia constitutes of the Medes and the Persians. The Medes today are the Kurds. The Persians are the Iranians. The bear rising on one side, well, one of them will arise and one of them won't. Today we have Persia arising. We look at the composition of the beast in Revelation. It has what? The body of a leopard, Grecian, Greco-Roman, not just Roman, Greco-Roman, Grecian. If you look at the Grecian Empire today, it's very much the 1040 window, Islam. The feet of a bear, Persia, Iran, mouth of a lion, Babylonia. Now, when we examine the Bible about Babylon, there is not one reference in the prophetic Bible about any of the ancient cities of Babylon. No mention of Babel, Kalne, Sumer, Akkad, Erech, not once. All the references, when it mentions vicinities and cities within the future Babylon, is all in Arabia. Dumma, Dummat al-Jandal, today is in Saudi Arabia. Didan, Qidar, those are all in Arabia and all mentioned in the context of Babylon in the Bible. Hello. So it's talking about the daughter of Babylon, born from Babylon, part of Babylon, not exactly Iraq, but the entire spectrum, Iraq, Arabia, all of it, but specifically pointing at Arabia by name.
Well, and it's interesting with Turkey meddling with all these affairs, and kind of aiding in the creation of the Islamic Caliphate in Syria and Iraq. Well, they're deceiving many. And you talk about, this false hope of peace, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. Who has basically been dealing with ISIS? Where are they getting their oil from? Syria. Who are they selling it to? The Turks. Cheap prices, so on and so forth. Erdogan, in fact, wanted to collaborate with the ISIS to invade Syria. There was a leak in the meeting of the top Turkish officials talking about invading Syria and using the ISIS to destroy the tomb of Sulaiman, which is one of the fathers of the Ottomans, just to make an excuse to invade Turkey. So there is a collaboration between the ISIS and Turkey. In fact, if you go to Turkey today, they're selling the ISIS shirts with the black flag all over Turkey. In fact, Erdogan himself said that he would not fight the ISIS because no Muslim can kill another Muslim. Hello, the ISIS are already killing Muslims. It's okay for the ISIS to kill Muslims so long you don't kill the ISIS who is Muslim. So very much, in fact, I even wrote articles when Turkish were kidnapped by the ISIS. I said they will be released, and in fact they were released. It was all a ruse, basically. They're very notorious for these kind of concoctions. Erdogan began to dismantle the secular government in Turkey through the Erdogan fiasco and basically began to imprison judges. He changed times and laws in Turkey. He did not honor the desire of women in Turkey, and that is the hijabization process in Turkey going on. And he's beginning to Islamize Turkey. And they have the Turkish model, which is very loved by the West, of course, because it is the Muslim secular model. It is very much palatable for the Western mind to say, well, we have peaceful Islam. And what does the Bible say? By peace he will deceive many. Islam is what? A peace-loving religion. Hello? When they say peace and safety, sudden destruction will come. This beast comes in the guise of peace. By peace, we must all say Islam is a peaceful religion, and so on and so forth. So the Turkish model is permeating all throughout the Middle East. Erdogan is a champion in the Middle East. In fact, they consider him a caliph already, but he doesn't have the title. Now he's going for another term. He has 2 terms. If they change the term from 5 years to 7 years, maybe we will have 2 7-year terms for Erdogan. In fact, I even wrote an article about Erdogan's success in the mayoral elections. And I even wrote the article before it happened, in preparation for the victory, when all the analysts were saying Erdogan is going to lose, his popularity rating is going down, so on and so forth. He won. I was right. They were all wrong.
Well, it's interesting. It almost seems like Turkey is to Syria what Pakistan was to Afghanistan in the 1990s, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Pakistan basically aided the Taliban. In fact, the U.S. aided the Taliban as well, not by intent, but because they were fighting the communists. We gave them Stinger missile even under Reagan. They gave Stinger missiles to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and that's what gave birth to the Taliban. And the same thing when it comes to Turkey. Turkey to the ISIS is exactly what Pakistan was to Afghanistan, in which the supply and the training, in fact, we monitor in Turkey. There's 3 centers in Turkey that trains ISIS fighters in Ghazi Adab and other places. So they're training. In fact, they're infiltrating. We even showed videos of ISIS infiltrating into Syria through Turkish borders. In fact, they sit right on the Turkish borders, and Turkey doesn't do anything. So they're waiting for the right moment to somehow take over this caliphate in Iraq and in Syria and proclaim a much larger picture of a major caliphate from Turkey. That's what's going to happen. So right now the ISIS is not fully accepted by many major Muslim theologians and Muslims, but it is nevertheless accepted by a major majority of many of the Islamists in everywhere, even in Saudi Arabia. They're gaining momentum increasingly. So God knows what will happen, whether al-Baghdadi is assassinated, he dies through illness somehow. In some way or another caliph will emerge and he'll come out of Turkey. That's the one who we should be aware of.
Weigh in on this, Theodore, please.
I wanted to add something to what my dad was saying about Saudi Arabia being the harlot of Babylon. When you look into the Tower of Babel, because the Tower of Babel has always been viewed by theologians as kind of this archetype to the harlot of Babylon, or an archetype to the religion of Antichrist. And so it's very important to understand what is the Tower of Babel if we're going to fully comprehend what is the harlot of Babylon. You look into the Tower of Babel, it's traditionally believed that the builder of the Tower of Babel was a man named Nimrod. And you say, well, who was Nimrod? Well, the Bible says that he was a Cushite, and many times we think, well, that means he was automatically an African. Now, Cush in Hebrew means Ethiopia. So, yes, biblically speaking, he was an Ethiopian. But he was not an Ethiopian in the sense of he was from what we call Ethiopia today. In antiquity, and also in ancient Israel, or even when we look into the geographical works of the Romans and the Greeks, what we find is that Ethiopia was identified not with what is today called Ethiopia, but with southern Arabia, what is today called Yemen and Oman, the southern Arabian countries. And the Bible tells us that Nimrud, his kingdom consisted of a city called Akkad. Now, what is Akkad? Akkad was an ancient city in Iraq, and it consisted of a people called Akkadians, obviously. Who were the Akkadians? The Akkadians were a people who came from South Arabia. Their religion was South Arabian. In fact, they worshipped a goddess by the name of Astar. Astar would become the archetypical goddess of the Arabs. And Astar would later evolve into Alat, and Alat would eventually become what we today call Allah. So Allah is a South Arabian deity. In fact, Mecca, the holy city of Islam, was built by South Arabians. So when we can conclude that Nimrud is really a South Arab, and he is part of a race that migrated from South Arabia into Iraq today, then we can conclude that the Tower of Babel is in fact a product of Arabian religion. So when we're going to talk about the religion of Antichrist and connect it with the Tower of Babel, Arabia has to be part of the equation. Arabian religion has to be part of the equation. So when we look, I know earlier in the show I said Islam was a Christian heresy, and of course that's true, but it is a Christian heresy that was merged with the native religion of Arabia, and that is why we have Mecca, that is why we have the Kaaba, that is why we have the black stone. We have these pagan symbols within Islam, because even though it is a Christian heresy, nonetheless it is still an Arabian religion. And like my father says, the Tower of Babel really was a place of pilgrimage. I think it's a misconception to say that the whole world lived in Babel, because in the book of Genesis, in the Table of Nations, Genesis chapter 10, every time the book of Genesis recounts the children or the grandchildren of Noah and their descendants, it always says in the end, and these are the sons of Japheth, their nations, their people, their tongues, their languages. And it does the same with both the descendants of Ham and the descendants of Shem. So therefore, if we read Genesis chronologically, there were different languages in existence before the Tower of Babel. So that's why I conclude that the Tower of Babel really was a place of pilgrimage where people would come together and be interconnected through a singular universal language.
In fact, in the Bible, Allah, the feminine root of Allah, is in the Bible. When they harassed the Israelites building the temple, who were they? Tobia, Ghasham, and Sanballat. It's in the Bible. Allat, Sanballat, the god Sin, and Allat, the female deity. Allat is the feminine root of Allah. In fact, if you say Allah, the feminine, is Allat. Allah and Allat, those were the deities in Arabia. So Allah is not a recent deity. In fact, Theodore was the one who basically broke the record in writing about where the oldest reference to Allah
Yes.
In fact, this was the oracles of what, Theodore?
No, I wrote an article a number of years ago called "The Oldest Reference to Allah." It's still on the internet today, and what I did is I found a translation of a very ancient text amongst the most ancient of all texts, called the Epic of Atrahasis. In the Epic of Atrahasis, in the beginning, it mentions a deity called Allah, and it says that Allah was the one who began the rebellion amongst the gods. And it states that Allah used fire and weapons, and he let's say, pushed the other gods to revolt with violence. And it's very fascinating because the Epic of Atrahasis was written not in Sumerian, but it was written in Akkadian, which is a South Arabian language. So here is an epic. And not only that, the epic is estimated to have been written at around 1700 BC, but even some Sumeriologists calculate the date to be around 1800 BC. So no matter which conclusion you come to, it's both very ancient. And it mentions Allah in the Akkadian, which is a South Arabian language. So here we have Allah mentioned in an Arabian language, in an ancient Mesopotamian text, going back to 1700 or even farther than that, 1800 BC. So it goes back very, very ancient, very ancient.
Almost 4,000 years.
Yeah. And therefore, because it was Akkadian, it would have been in existence in the time of Nimrud. This is why I'm saying this, is because if it can go back that far, and because it is in the Akkadian language, which would have been the language that was being spoken in the time of Nimrud, it makes sense to say that Allah was worshipped in the time of the Tower of Babel.
One of the references to the Antichrist is Nimrod in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, would it be fair to say that Allah has the same characteristics of Satan?
Absolutely. In fact, some of the names of Allah in the Quran, Allah has 99 names. One of them is Al-Mumit, the one who causes death. Ad-Dar, the afflictor. Khayrul Makirin, the greatest of all deceivers. Al-Mutakabbir, the most proud. Hello, in the Bible, when we read the Bible, in fact, the most proud, the one who causes death, Apollyon, and so on and so forth, was none other than the Antichrist and the devil. So very much the attributes to the devil are in the Bible. They're in Islam and the Quran. In fact, even the Antichrist and the Christ in Islam, the Messiah of Islam is called the Mahdi, the coming Messiah of Islam. And he, in Islam, brings 7 years of peace. That's how he's recognized. 7 years of peace. And he has to make 7 years of peace. This is why he can't go against the Bible, which God already proclaimed. He basically will confirm a covenant for 7 years, that is. And in Islam, you cannot have a peace treaty for more than 10 years, 7 to 10 years, at the most 10 years. So there is a peace treaty of 7 years in Islam, in which it's broken in the middle. And in fact, they take, Antichrist stands in Jerusalem, proclaims himself, giving himself attributes to God. That means he gives himself names that belongs to God. In fact, if you look at the names of a Mahdi or Muhammad even himself, what does Muhammad mean? Muhammad means the glorious one. How can you call any man the glorious one? He is As-Siraj al-Munir, the glowing lamp. He is Al-Awwal, the first. He is Al-Akhir, the last. He gives his names. This is the confusion. People think that Islam doesn't worship a man. Yes, they do worship a man. In fact, in every Muslim home you see Allah, Muhammad next to each other. In fact, one cannot become a Muslim unless he declares Muhammad is the messenger of God. Well, wait a minute. If Islam and Christianity are the same, why do I have to declare Muhammad is the messenger of Allah? Why can't I say Ezekiel, Joel, and all the other prophets are the messengers of God, and let's have a cafe latte, and have peace? But that's not the case in Islam. You must elevate Muhammad. In fact, in the Quran itself, Allah says regarding Muhammad, we've given him a glorious name after our own name, which means God's name himself Muhammad has. So this is an entity that denies they worship a man. Why? Because they must denounce Christ as God. No man can be God, but at the same rate they do worship a man, Muhammad, even worship the black stone. How does a Muslim get his sins cleansed? He goes to the Kaaba, he goes round about 7 times, and the black stone is black because it takes away the sins of the Muslim. So even the idol has become deity in the Kaaba. Every Muslim bows to it. It's an image. And in fact, even if you look at Acts chapter 19, verse 35, do not worship Artemis and the image that fell from Zeus. What was the image of Artemis that fell in Zeus? It was a black stone, a meteor, exactly as we have in Mecca. So the Bible itself tells us that a meteor or a black stone can qualify as an image. Now in Revelation it says everybody must what? Bow to the image of the beast. Hello, that's an image, could qualify as a black stone, not just a statue.
Well, it put me in mind of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in that area, and they had to bow down to the, essentially it'd be like bowing down to Mecca, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, the Colossus.
And what's fascinating is when we go to that story in Acts where Paul confronts the pagans for worshiping Artemis, there's actually archaeology that I've found found in Arabia that was made by Greeks, and there was actually one inscription that they translated from Greek into English that literally said verbatim, it said Artemis who is Alat. And it was amazing how the Arabs and the Greeks, they identified Artemis with Alat, who was really, if you look at the black stone, which is in the holiest image in the Islamic religion, the black stone originally was a symbol of the goddess Alat. And the Romans, when they saw her, they identified her with Aphrodite. And the Romans also called Aphrodite Lucifero, which we call Lucifer, light bearer. And so not only was Paul dealing with this same deity, but he was dealing with Satan.
Yes.
And so the Muslims worship the same deity.
In fact, if you look at the famous reference, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, and every Christian in America will know that verse, that Jesus Christ is Lord. But if we look at the book of Isaiah, I believe it's in 48, it talks about every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, Bel bows, Nebo stoops. Bel, according to Arthur Jeffrey, one of the greatest scholars on Islam, he says Bel is the god moon god Sin, the crescent moon. So when the Bible says Bel bows, Nebo stoops, it's talking about the crescent moon bowing when Christ comes, which means the end of Islam. In fact, even the depiction in Revelation chapter 12, the woman with the crescent under her feet. Hello. In other words, it's stomped on. It's stomped on by this vision by John of this woman. We depict the woman as Israel. The Catholics depict it as Mary. And we have, agreements about basically this threat that comes to gulp Christendom, to gulp Israel as well. It is many layers of the prophetic structure in which the crescent moon is literally mentioned in the book of Revelation and how it's defeated.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you've walked us kind of through how, Babylon and the organized false religions. And so essentially there's going to be soon, I guess, a world war between the forces of the, Pseudo-Christian West and these radical Islamic nations. Is that fair to say? The emerging beast mentioned in Daniel, we're talking about these Islamic nations, or convincing Islam to join the pluralistic world church, I guess, under a peace agreement. The city of Jerusalem will become, I'm assuming, an international religious center for 7 years, and then what happens next? I mean, help our listeners really
you make
understand
an interesting question. You make an interesting question because you say essentially there'll be a war with the West. Well, we have to think about what the mindset of the Western prophecy crowd. They think that the Antichrist basically rules the entire globe because it says the whole earth. We can get into that subject later on. But that's not accurate when we think the whole earth becomes part of the Antichrist. Why? Well, in Daniel chapter 11, the Antichrist, he declares war on the strongest fortresses If he declares war on the strongest fortresses, the strongest military might, that is, that means the Antichrist system is not the most powerful military might in the world. There are more powerful than him. If he declares war on the strongest, well, some will assume, well, he must defeat them. Not so, because the verses in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 7 and 8, everybody should read those, because it talks about the defeat of the Antichrist. He's called the cherub in that very chapter, and he's described as a man, also described as a man in Isaiah chapter 14. It talks about his end. God will raise nations, the most terrible of the nations. Most terrible doesn't mean ugly. Terrible in battle. The most terrible nations in battle, the most powerful nations in the world, will take him, and they will cast him into the pit. They will destroy your splendor. Hello, they pertains to the most terrible of the nations, most powerful nations of the world. Well, let's ask ourselves, who are the most powerful nations in the world? The United States, Russia. Russia will fight Turkey. Why? Because even the Antichrist himself, he will have bad news from the north. So if the Antichrist is from Europe, what's north of Europe? Ocean. Doesn't fit. There's no threat coming from an ocean. And if Gog was Russia, well, what's north of Russia? Ocean. That doesn't work. It has to be north enough, and it has to have a threat north of it. If you look at Turkey, and you look north of Turkey, what do you find? Russia. Russia will come against Turkey and will defeat Turkey. And this is why Daniel says, and he will come to his end, and no one will help him. So eventually, it will be similar to Nazi Germany, in which, for a change, the United States and Russia will ally together, the most powerful nations in the world, with the Europeans. The ships of Khittim will come against him. The ships of Khittim is the ships in the Mediterranean. Think of Spain, Italy, Greece. They will also join in this coalition. Greece wants to get Hagia Sophia back from Turkey. Erdogan wants to sit in Hagia Sophia. He wants to make it a mosque. In fact, Hagia Sophia in Christian history is considered a temple of God. So Daniel talks about enters the temple of God, but we believe that's in Jerusalem. However, it is very reminiscent to him coming into Jerusalem, into the temple, the rebuilt temple, and entering in it and sitting there proclaiming himself Mahdi, the light of Allah, so on and so forth, proclaiming himself deity.
Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking, of the Turkish Prime Minister. I mean, Erdogan, he's seeming to be moderate to Islam. He said, there's no such thing as moderate Islam, only Islam. But think about NATO and them repelling ISIS and opposing the Iranian nuclear bombs. Well, it's condemning the West Bank manhunt. And then, it's like Israel to Adolf Hitler, and there's U.S. forces and focusing on Russia. So it's all very interesting what's playing out right now. As you were talking, I'm thinking it just really seems like this is, and of course Zechariah 5:7-11 tells us in the end times wickedness will be brought to a house built for on the plains of Shinar. Well, where is that? That's located smack dab in the middle of Iraq. So it's just very interesting, isn't it?
Correct. Very interesting. In fact, if you take my proposition, Ezekiel 38 is Turkey, Gog, Meshech Tubal is Turkey, it allies with Iran, Persia. They will go with Persia. So we'll have a Turkic-Persian alliance. Now, Turkey today is ancient Greece. Where Turkey today is where ancient Greece is. And this is why in Zechariah 9 we translated correctly Greece. And the Messiah comes and fights this Greece. And so we have an alliance. And John tells us. He tells us the body of a leopard, Greece, the feet of a bear, Persia, Iran. They will unify in the end. And the utmost destruction will be against Arabia. They will hate the Wahhabis of Arabia. They will unite Shia and Sunni. Right now we see Shia and Sunni war. Wait till the next coming years. They will unite. They will unite as Hezbollah united with Hamas in the past against Israel. Hezbollah is Shiite, Alawi, and Hamas is Sunni. Yet they did ally together against Israel. So when it comes to Israel, the Muslims will eventually ally. Iran hates Israel, so do the Turks hate Israel, so do the Wahhabists hate Israel. But the unification of Shia and Sunni has to stem from what we call Sufi brand of Islam. The Sufist Muslims, they adore the icons of the Shiites, unlike the Wahhabists. They adore Ali, Hussein, and Hassan. Those are the icons of the Shia. Those are hated by the Sunni Wahhabists. Yet if you go to Hagia Sophia in Turkey, the church, the largest church in Christendom that's going to be converted to a mosque, it has the emblems of who? Ali, Hassan, Hussein, Uthman, Umar, Abu Bakr, all collectively Sunni and Shiite icons together. This is why Rouhani goes to Turkey. And this is why, did you know, the majority of the Persians, the Iranians, almost half the population are Azeri Turks. People don't think about that. The religious ruling party in Iran are Azeri Turks. They're Turkish. So we forget that when Rouhani goes to Turkey, he's visiting brethren. He's not visiting strangers. They are of the same ilk. So this is what the West doesn't understand. Those intricate, different, family and sectarian issues is not understood in the West, and this is why they can't see the full picture, either biblically, prophetically, or even politically.
Talk about, you're so right, and I really want you to get into, when you talk, and of course in your Bible prophecy series, you talk about the coming Muslim Antichrist, you talk about one world government. I want you to tell our listeners, and for those who are just tuning in, of course, we have Walid Shoebat and his son Theodore joining us. I want you to talk about what you believe the mark of the beast is, and then we're going to springboard into what I find to be a very disturbing trend, and it's the marking of Christians for persecution, how it's begun, and sort of the prelude to the coming Antichrist. So get into that for our listeners, please, Walid.
Well, it's very important when we understand in Revelation, I believe chapter 13, there are three different flavors: the name of the beast, the mark of the beast, or the number of his name. So there's not one flavor, there's several flavors here, but the essence of it is the number of his name and the name of the beast. When we think of a name of the beast, most people think, well, it's a name of the Antichrist on their foreheads. Not exactly. It's not going to say Hillary Rodham Clinton on the foreheads of the followers of Antichrist if Hillary becomes the Antichrist. No, it's not a literal name. We have to think of a name from an allegoric perspective. Think of Jesus. Jesus has a name. His name is what? His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Those are not literal names. Those are in essence descriptions. If we look, his name shall be called Emmanuel, which is God with us. Well, his name is not Emmanuel. The Messiah's name is not Emmanuel literally. If his name was literally Emmanuel, the Messiah will come from Mexico. But he came from Bethlehem. His name is Emmanuel, which is God with us. What's God with us? That's our creed. That's our statement of faith. We, the Christians, believe God came down to us. That's what it is. And in essence, if you look at the name of the beast, it is the creed of the beast, the title of the beast. And it is literally etched on what is called charagma in Greek. Charagma really is badge. Look at Strong's, it tells you. So they have a badge of servitude, and on it written the creed of the beast. They put this badge on their foreheads. Hello, why are Muslims putting these badges on their foreheads? Just look at every Muslim demonstration, Muslim terrorist group, Muslims, they are putting badges already on their foreheads. Why? Because in Islam, in the Hadith, Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, talks about the end times. In fact, the Quran itself talks about the end times. In fact, in the Quran, it talks about the beast coming out of the earth. Well, we have in the Bible the beast rising from the earth. In the Quran, the job of the beast who rises from the earth, comes out of the earth, is a good job, not a bad job. He marks all Muslims on their foreheads. So when you see a party, you will recognize who is and who is not Muslim from the marking on their foreheads. Ever look at in Muslim males, especially Egypt, over 90% of Muslim males have a prostration mark on their forehead, what they call zabiba. They love the marking on their foreheads already. They do this from prostration hard on the ground. Why? Because all Muslims must be marked on their foreheads in the end times. And in fact, Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, talked about the salvation of a Muslim. He shows the Muslim in Judgment Day the registrar of all his sins. And he says, have you anything to say about these sins? And the Muslim will confess, indeed, I have committed all these sins. And then the angel will tell the Muslim, but we have a favor for you. Here is the badge that you wore. On it written, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Written on it, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. The very call to the prayer that Mr. Obama talked to the New York Times, that was his favorite sound, the mark of Islam, the Bismillah in the name of Allah. All these things are reminiscent to marking on the foreheads. In fact, this is part and parcel of Islam. In the end times, all Muslims will be marked on the foreheads. Could you imagine me as a Muslim when I read the Bible? The marking on the foreheads and the right arm, it's not the hand, it's dexios, the arm, on the shoulder of the arm. You can see Muslims putting these badges on their right arm and their foreheads, giving allegiance. In fact, you look at the Khilafah today. What are the Muslims doing with al-Baghdadi? They are giving what is called bay'ah. Bay'ah, literally giving allegiance. You can see them, crowds filled of Muslims, giving allegiance to the Khalifa, giving allegiance to the Antichrist in the same way. Marking their foreheads, giving allegiance. All these things in the Bible are very reminiscent to us, what I grew up with as a Muslim, and every Muslim knows these things.
Well, weigh in on that, please, Theodore.
Well, when we look into the Islamic religion and to its nature, it fits perfectly to the biblical criteria of what is today called, of what is Antichrist. The Apostle John gives us this criteria when he says, whoever denies Father and Son is Antichrist. And John also says that whoever denies that Christ is come in the flesh is Antichrist. He mentions this more than once, actually.
Arios. Is an Arios...
Well, so when we're looking to the history of Islam, I think we should not always begin with Muhammad. We should always begin with Arios. Arios was a 4th century heretic who said that Christ is not God. And to make a long story short, there was a war between the Catholics and the Arians that lasted for quite some time. Eventually, the Arians lost the war, and the remnant of the Arians were thrown into the Middle East. There was one Arian in Egypt, and he wanted to be like a bishop, but they decided not to do it because he was an Arian, and he went to Saudi Arabia. And while he was in Saudi Arabia, he met a man named Muhammad. Muhammad was a pagan Arab, and he convinced Muhammad to become an Arian. Muhammad becomes an Arian. He becomes an Arian, a heretic who denies the divinity of Jesus. He takes Arianism and he simply adds an Arab twist to it. So Islam really is not something that was invented by Muhammad. It really is something that was invented by a 4th century heretic, over 200 years before Muhammad was even born. So that's how I would begin. And even when Arianism was thriving as a heresy, there were a number of theologians who declared that Arianism is the religion of Antichrist. St. Ambrose of Milan being one of them, probably the most prominent one, stated that the religion of the Antichrist is Arianism, and he concluded that based on reading what St. John said, whoever denies the Father and the Son is Antichrist.
Well, hold that thought, because, guys, we have got a wall of calls. We've got a gazillion questions. Would you guys stay on with us the 3rd hour? I know you're only planning 2, but will you come back with us when we go for a break and take some calls? I mean, we've got a ton of people that have questions, and we can give out your more information on what you guys are doing now, how people can get behind you. I mean, those 2 hours just flew by.
No problem.
Would you be willing to do that? Okay. Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, of course, we will get into some questions from callers and as well, get into more of this conversation. Fascinating, folks. Hold on, we'll be right back, listeners.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour of this Weekend of Vigilante Hagman and Hagman Saturday edition, which has become, we've received so much positive feedback from the listeners, and I can't thank Sheila enough for the hard work that she has put into making this weekend edition happen, and for just getting some of the best guests and doing the top-notch interviews. It really is great, and Sheila, it's much appreciated. Our guests.
Well, thank you, and I really just want to thank our guests here, because I'm going to tell you what, these guys are sticking. Joe, Doug, we stick we put our lives on the line to bring people information, and I want to really give a kudos and a heartfelt love to Walid and Theodore Shoebat, because I'm going to tell you right now, when you are exposing Islam and, you're getting into the nitty-gritty of what's really going on, again, like I said earlier, this is not some guy who read a book. This guy lived it. This guy lived that Islamic terrorist life. He really has a thumb on the pulse of what's going on, probably better than anyone that I've ever read. Him and his son actually have, I would say, honestly, they're light years beyond the other information that I've compiled and researched. And again, I don't speak perfect Arabic. In fact, I know 2 words. So, obviously, the man is, he's from there. And I think just looking at this through the lens of the East rather than the West, and the really neat thing is, Walid, I know that you are you're an American, and that's what's really amazing. You're a patriotic American, and you hear this, America's doomed, and, that must be really interesting for you. But I also just want to put a note into the callers before we jump back in. We're going to, as you know, we're going to be taking some calls, and we're opening up the phone line. So if you are listening by phone, press 1, and that puts you into the call queue. And please be respectful and keep it down to a short minimum. Ask your question, let them answer it, move on. And by the way, we're not going to put up with any, we don't monitor our phone lines, and we don't, screen calls. So if there's any garbage, people are going to be off. So, you're a patriotic American. You must, how do you feel when you hear all this headlines, America's doom and gloom, it's collapsing? How do you feel about that?
Absolute nonsense. America is doomed and gloomed. If you can't find 10 believers in America, yeah, sure, it becomes like Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, Babylon becomes like Sodom and Gomorrah because God says, which is really, Babylon is Arabia, come out of her, my people, lest you suffer in her plagues. In fact, that's exactly what happened. And when the first Iraq war, when Saddam Hussein lobbed Scuds, all the migrant workers, all the Christians left. And so this is the same thing that will happen. You can't destroy a country if there is a remnant that's there. It's still, America by and large is a beacon to the world in many ways. Sure, we struggle. This is a country that is evil and good fighting each other continuously. I lived in Mexico for a year. I remember. I said, I miss America very much because at least I can watch Hannity and Combs. Combs is a liberal, Hannity is a conservative, and it's about right versus wrong. America is a country, always was and always will be about right versus wrongs. Sure, the wrongs can have victories, but the rights have victories too in this country. So it's, in essence, it's still the beacon of the world. But it's not what we say or teach that is the great thing. I teach a lot and I write articles. I look at Jesus in Matthew 25. He says, I was hungry and you spoke out. No, he says, I was hungry and you fed me. We also run Rescue Christians. We are literally saving Christian lives. And thank God for America. Americans, by and large, help and aid us to aid the persecuted Christians in Pakistan and elsewhere in the Middle East, in which we send rescue missions to take Christians out of danger zone. That's the thing Christ talked about when he talked in Matthew 25. About helping the brethren, that is Israel and the church who is suffering in Mosul and so on and so forth. We need to be vigilant and being active in helping and aiding Christians as well. So we'd like to tell your listeners about, that to look up Rescue Christians in our website.
Can I ask something real quick? Right now, we're actually doing a project. We're the only people in the world who are doing this. Right now, we're doing a project in order that is bent and intentional on rescuing Christians in Pakistan from slavery. In Pakistan currently, there are around 20,000 Christian families who have been enslaved by Muslims in brick factories. And what they do is they really get Christian families to work in these brick factories, and they don't allow them to leave. And they leave them in bondage and enslavement. And also, the women, the girls, the daughters are allowed to be raped, sexually tortured, sexually mutilated. In fact, there was a girl that we rescued. Her name is Tanya Rebecca. You can look at her name up and you can find her story. She was kidnapped by a gang of Muslims. They sold her into slavery. She became a sex slave to a Muslim gang. They took her, stripped her completely naked. They got a rope and they tied her around a tree. They got knives and they cut her body throughout her whole body. They made these very large cuts. They burnt her body with cigarettes, and they gang raped her over and over again. And when you think that's bad enough, they turned her around and they carved a hole on her anus, and they raped her through that hole over and over and over again for several days. And we rescued this girl and we interviewed her, and she explained all of these things. So in order for us to continue to rescue these Christian girls and families who are suffering this sort of diabolical, sadistic evil, we need your help. So I'm asking the audience to go to rescuechristians.org. Give what you can. There's no set limit on what you can give. You can get $5, $10, $20, $25. It doesn't matter, because all the money you send goes directly to helping these Christians. We don't make a dime out of any of the donations. It goes directly to helping and saving Christian lives. We literally take these Christians, put them in safe houses, and in many occasions we take them to different countries, to Thailand, to Sri Lanka, and to other nations as well. So we're the only people doing this. We have an actual rescue team in Pakistan doing this.
Well, and
That's
I just
awesome.
want to put it out there that, I mean, it's one thing to say that you are, helping persecuted Christians. It's real nice when you're sitting on your armchair in the middle of the West. But when you're on the front battle lines over there, these Christians that, of course, Steve Quayle talks about it, folks, everybody else, the butchering of our brethren, the persecuted Christian that are over in these countries and trying to preach the gospel. I mean, this is very serious work, and it's very dangerous. And I just really want to encourage everybody to, dig deep here, because this is a very good cause to be supporting when, I guess what I can't wrap my head over, Walid and Theodore, is the evil incarnate of these people. You see these guys on YouTube videos, they're eating Christians' kidneys and hearts, and, it's bad enough they're holding up. You just saw this Australian jihadist.
Not only that, but in Syria, the Muslim rebels, one of the main reasons why they are killing Christians. So you want to know one of the main reasons why there's money involved. In Saudi Arabia, there is a huge business in selling Christian blood. Yes, that's right. Selling Christian blood. We did an interview with a Christian woman, a nun, Eastern Orthodox nun by the name of Hatun Dojan. She has a monastery in Germany, but she does a lot of work in Syria. And she explained these things to us. And she said that in Syria, she met with a rebel jihadist in Syria who converted to Christianity. And he was explaining to her that there is a big business in killing Christians, because he says in Saudi Arabia there is a superstitious belief that if you drink Christian blood, or if you wash your hands in Christian blood, Allah will give you salvation, because there is some kind of power. They believe there's some kind of power in the blood of a Christian. And so he says that when we kill a Christian, we behead him, we will drain the blood from his body and put them in little vials. And we will receive literally $100,000 for every vial of Christian blood. Small vial. Because they believe, They really believe that if they bathe their hands in Christian blood, Allah will give them salvation, and it guarantees their salvation.
So not only is there money in murdering Christians over there, you have the other side where the big pastors kill the souls of Christians by misleading them and telling them what they want to hear. It seems like but no matter where you go, it's
yes.
No, but can you give that website out again?
RescueChristians.org. And again, you can give as much money as you want, $5, even $1 if you want. Doesn't matter.
One word, RescueChristians.org.
RescueChristians.org.
No hyphen.
But there's one thing I want to add. The fact that you have Muslims taking blood and buying it, this adds further evidence to the idea of Saudi Arabia being the harlot of Babylon, because John says she drinks the blood of the saints. And in this case, it's literally, in this case, she's literally drinking the blood of the saints. The Catholic Church doesn't drink blood. There's no business in Rome of drinking Christian blood. There's no business anywhere in the world of drinking Christian blood except in Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's a good segue into a bunch of questions I'm getting. And again, I just want to remind people that if they're listening by phone, press 1. I mean, we're going to open up the call lines. It's like everything you ever wanted to ask Walid and Theodore. Hey, now's your time, folks. But here's a question to you. We have email questions, and one of them is that did the Vatican start Islam? What's your response to that?
I wrote an entire essay on this subject alone this year. It's called "The Catholic Church Did Not Invent Islam." Literally, that's the title. You type it up, you'll get it. It's the first thing that comes up on Google. It is impossible to come to the conclusion that the Vatican invented Islam. This idea comes from someone who says he was an ex-Jesuit by the name of Alberto Rivera. There's no evidence that he was a Jesuit, but he is the one who made up this idea. And Jack Chick picked it up, and it spread like wildfire. But when we look into the actual sources, let's go back to the Catholic documentation that was written in the time of Islam's beginnings. So you look at back when Islam first came as a religion. You read the Quran. One of the most famous verses that Christians love to quote when exposing Islam is Surah 9, because in Surah 9 it says, "Kill all those who do not believe in Allah until they confess Allah." Well, I read the whole chapter, and you read the verses that come just before that verse. It mentions the people, Muhammad mentions the people that he wants to kill. It says, the Jews worship their rabbis, and the Christians believe their monks. Well, excuse me, who believes in monks? Who hears monks? It's not Protestants, it's the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox. They have monks. So even Muhammad, when he wrote the Quran, he was saying, go kill Catholics, go forth. Before Muhammad died, he said there will be two cities you will have to invade, Rome and Constantinople. Why? Because Rome is the head of, at his time, Rome was the head of the Western Roman Catholic Church, and Constantinople was the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, and not only that, but you look into some of the oldest Catholic sources in the time of Islam's beginnings. What are they? You look at amongst the most ancient sources are the writings of a Catholic theologian by the name of Theodore Abukura. He lived in Iraq. He was a Catholic bishop, and he confronted Islam when it first began as a religion. And I have read all the writings of Theodore Abukura. And he declares the religion of Islam to be antichrist. He declares the religion of Islam to be evil, to be heretical. And in his writings are recorded about 2 or 3 debates that Theodore Abukura had with Muslims. And you read the debates, the Muslim is refuting or going against Catholic theology, the Catholic theology of the Eucharist, the Catholic theology of, let's say, the crucifixion, the Catholic theology of the Trinity. All these things Theodore Abukura is debating. Not only do we have the writings of Theodore Abukura, but we also have the writings of John the Deacon, who was around the same time period. And he also declares Islam to be a heresy. Then you have the writings of John of Damascus, which is around the 9th century, a little bit later. And John of Damascus declares Islam to be the religion of Antichrist. Not only that, but he says that Islam was invented through the Arian heresy. And around that same time, in the year 849, the Muslims arose and tried to invade Rome. And even a number of years before that, they tried to invade Rome again. So why, and even before Islam was invented, the Catholic Church was combating what? Arianism. Muhammad was an Arian. Islam is really an Arabian version of Arianism. So how could the Catholic Church be battling, or why would the Catholic Church invent another form of Arianism when it was already combating Arianism before Islam was even invented. So not only is there no historical documentation, but when we look at the documentation that we have, it directly contradicts what Alberto Rivera said and what other people who say that the Catholic Church invented Islam say. So that's what I would.
Wasn't it the first Catholic that exposed Islam was Ricardo de Montecroce? And Martin Luther, in fact, the reformer, he was not knowledgeable about Islam. He was complimentary of Islam, didn't know much about Islam until he read the works of Ricardo de Montecroce, a Catholic who went into the Muslim world and wrote his essays about Islam and what was Islam, which caused Martin Luther to change his mind about Islam. And this is why Martin Luther, when he talked about the religion of Antichrist, he says that the body of the beast is Islam, but that the Harlot of Babylon is the Catholic Church. Nevertheless, he recognized that Islam was the danger essence and that Islam will be the beast.
Okay, well, I'm going to just give I'm getting a whack of emails here, and I've got some questions. I'm going to give out the number for people as well. It's 661-244-9839, folks, if you do have a question, and I'll get Joe to take some calls. But one of the questions that I do have is this, and it says it's for Walid, and the next one is for your son. I'll ask Theodore this first one. Being that you are a young person, I'm assuming that you're, I don't know how old you are, I'm assuming maybe 30-ish.
23.
Okay.
23.
So
I'll be turning 24 in September.
Okay. So being in your 20s, the question is, how does Theodore view Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood and the umbrella organizations that are giving birth, being that he's a young person stepping back outside this and looking, like not through the eyes of, say, your dad who was actually immersed in that culture. So that's the question to you.
Well, the answer to that question is really the way I look at the Muslim Brotherhood is the way my father would see it, because what I know about the Muslim Brotherhood, most of it comes from my father. The way I see Islam, I see it, most people today, even amongst conservative circles, they see Islam as just simply, they like to look at Islam through a secular perspective, meaning they are these people called Muslims, they want to kill us, that's why we must expose Islam. The way I look at things is a little bit differently. I say, I don't look at Islam through a secular perspective. In fact, I don't look at much of anything through a secular perspective, but through a theological lens. And when you look at Islam, I see Islam as a danger. Why? Because it is a heresy. And Islam is violent because it is a heresy. Islam is dangerous because it is a heresy. I would say Islam. I don't like this idea of seeing everything through secular eyes. Like, you see these big conferences that a lot of these conservative activists have, and they just say, keep it secular, don't talk about religion. Why? Let's talk about religion. Islam is a religion. This is a religious conflict. Islam did not come to destroy secularism. Islam came to destroy Christianity. So the way I look at the whole conflict is not a war between Islam and the West, or a war between Islam and the modern world, but I see this conflict as a war between Islam and Christendom. That's the way I would see it.
Okay, and this one is to your dad. Islam is interesting. Also, it's interesting to note that Obama in America is okay to abort children, yet the Islam nation is on the uprise. Please weigh in on that.
Oh, okay. Well, we have a liberal movement in America, and Obama being liberal, or even the Congressman Keith Ellison, who swore on the Quran being Muslim, and he is also liberal. How does that make any sense? We have to understand the first myth we need to understand, Islam is not a conservative religion. It is not what you think it is. If it is conservative, why is Keith Ellison, who proclaims himself as Muslim, liberal? So, that doesn't refute that Obama could be Muslim, a closet Muslim, because Islam believes in what is called al-ishtirakiyya al-islamiyya, Islamic socialism. In fact, the story of the Makkiyans and the Al-Ansar, al-Muhajirun wal-Ansar, when the Muslims in Mecca seeked refuge in Medina, the Muslims in Medina shared the wealth. Sharing the wealth comes from Islam. In fact, this is why even under the government of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, or even Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, it's Islamic socialism. So you have Islamic socialism. In fact, Islam doesn't believe that life begins at the moment of conception. Islam believes in what they call gestation period, in which the soul has not entered into the fetus. That means it's basically a blob. So this tickles the ears of the abortionist. In fact, Islam has what is called himaz. The himaz in Islam means environmental protectorates, in which this tickles the ears of the environmentalists. In fact, Islam doesn't believe, many of the theologians or the slick willies of the Islamic movement in America talk about theistic evolution, in which the Quran talks about how God rent the earth asunder and from this gaseous and all these things, which means Islam really, in essence, in modern times, have believed in theistic evolution. So this tickles the ears of the evolutionist. Al Gore, when he quotes his stuff about Islam, in fact, you could look up my articles, Al Gore and Islam. Al Gore compliments Islam. I have researched Al Gore's statements and his references. He got all the references from Abdullah Umar Nassif. Abdullah Umar Nassif was one of the godfathers supporting Al-Qaeda. He was also the boss, direct boss.
Yeah, and this is the same huckster. Let's not forget, too, Walid is the same huckster that sold to Al Jazeera, too, so he's selling us out as well, in addition. Don't get me started about that fat pig Al Gore, but that's for another. But, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned, because really America is always called the Great Satan by the Muslims, and yet Allah is really more parallel to Satan. So that'd be my question is, how do they always get this America's the Great Satan if really everything that fundamentally these guys believe is really more mirrored with Satan? That's the part, I guess that's Sheila's question.
Well, they view America as a great Satan because they figure out America is a Christian country. And so they have corrupted the essence of Christianity in their belief that Christianity is a Unitarian religion. This is why Muslims see eye to eye with the oneness movement, Unitarians, and so on and so forth. They agree with these as the original Christians. So they hate America because primarily American Christians believe in the Trinity. So they believe that the Trinity was basically a satanic invention. And so they view America as the great Satan because it also supports the state of Israel. If you kind of destroy America, in fact, even in the manifesto of the Saudi government, which Huma Abedin, by the way, her father, was one of the 20-some scholars who made the manifesto. They viewed America as the greatest obstacle to the victory of Islam because many in America are Jews and rich Jews and wealthy Jews and influential Jewish people and so on and so forth. So America must be destroyed first. And this is the whole idea of the destruction of America from within by the Muslim Brotherhood too. They talk about America being destroyed from within. So they view America as the great clog, basically. It's the obstacle for the advancement of Islam globally, because any global movement, if God forbid Turkey, which is going to happen, become the Ottoman Empire, who's going to stop it? It's going to be America. So they want to remove all the obstacles that stands against Islam, and that would be primarily the United States of America. And this is why I'm behooved at many Christians who view America as it's doomed. They have the harbingers and all these things that America is, it just drives me crazy to watch Americans think of America as a great Satan in a way.
Well, can I add something to that? This whole idea of America being destroyed, I'm actually quite surprised of how many people still believe that. When the Japanese were formulating their empire and they were expanding all throughout East Asia, they had this fantasy that they were going to invade America. And even the Japanese government, the imperial government, was already giving the title to the emperor, Hirohito, as emperor of the Americans. As laughable as that sounds, they were quite serious about it. But here's the most fascinating part of this is what the Japanese government feared the most about invading the United States was not the American military. Their number one fear was the average American, because the Japanese understood that the average American has a weapon, shotgun or some sort of firearm. So they said, they knew, the Japanese understood that if they were going to invade America, it was not going to be as easy as invading China, where no one had guns, and it was very easy to go in there and rape and pillage and chop people into pieces. To invade America would be much more difficult. So any country thinking of invading the United States is living in a fantasy world. It would be very difficult.
Okay, Joe, we got some callers, hey? Hey, Joe, are you still on the air?
Oh, I just pulled my dad. I talked while I was muted and didn't notice. He does that all the time. But Chance is on with us, a sponsor of owner of American Survival Wholesale, our sponsors. Chance, what's your question?
Blessings, Sheila. Listen, so I came across an article, and we're talking about persecuted Christians. Now, if I could, I'd like to read a little bit of this and then a little prayer as well. Around the world, many believers are persecuted, imprisoned, and even killed for their faith. Since Jesus laid down his life, over 43 million Christians have become martyrs, and right now 200 million people face persecution for believing in Jesus, and 60% of those people are children. In the Bible, there are several examples of prayer, and let's start with Ephesians. Ephesians 1:8 says, "Please pray for persecuted believers who know the hope God gives." Ephesians 3:16, "Pray the Holy Spirit would strengthen them." Ephesians 3:17, "Please pray persecuted believers would know how much God loves them." Ephesians 6:19, "Pray that they would know how to share the gospel." And Ephesians 6:20, "Please pray that persecuted believers would fearlessly tell others about Jesus." And as far as practical needs, please pray that persecuted believers would have access to a Bible, they would have courage. Please pray for believers who have been rejected by family and friends. Pray that God would surround them with a new Christian family who loves them and supports them emotionally and physically. And pray for God to be an advocate for these women who are socially vulnerable, who have lost the custody of their children because of their faith. Please pray that God would provide persecuted believers with jobs and safe places to live.
Okay, let me jump in here, Chance. So do you have a question for them? And I agree with what you're saying, and I'll even take it one step further. And I hope you have a question, but I'll take this one step further. I believe that it's not just about praying, though. It's also about putting, it's praying also, but action to it, too. And we can't just say, God bless you and hope you're making out good over there and, will you die for your beliefs and you're, martyred and persecuted. I think it's also about donating to people that are in the front lines too. So I really hope people, reach in their pockets tonight and donate to this. But what is your question for Walid, please, Chance?
Not as much of a question, Sheila, as a suggestion, and I agree with you completely. Taking action is the second phase of what we need to do, but prayer comes first. And through the Holy Spirit, we give over this pain and this suffering to the Lord. Me and Joe spoke of this earlier. That's where it starts. And by supporting these ministries that are trying to help these poor folks all over the Middle East through the pain and the suffering that they're experiencing on a daily basis, pain that we don't know, pain that we don't understand, absolutely. So really not as much of a question, but listen, you need to know that we are in prayer and we're in complete agreement.
If I may remark, can I say something?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Prayer is absolutely the right thing to do. Now, my question is always, if your key falls to the ground, do you pray that God elevates the key into your hand so you can open the door? Or do you bend down, pick up the key, and open the door? Now, if it's pitch dark, your key falls to the ground and you can't see the key, would you not pray for God to help you find the key so you can open the door and touch the knob and try to find the keyhole, to put the key in and open and enter? So it goes together. We pray at times when the issue is beyond us and we can't do anything about it. But if something we can do something about, indeed we pray in action. And this is why if you look at our website, it is in action. It is information in action. And this is part of our motto. And that is activism in action.
That's a very good point. We start with prayer, and we give it over to the Lord. but we also, as believers, need to take action. And sometimes that's hard for a lot of Christians to do. But if it's reaching in your pocket and giving a love offering, or it's supporting a ministry that is doing that work, that's where we need to be.
Correct.
Well, thank you for that, Chance. We're going to move along here to other callers. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for calling in, Chance. Have a good night.
God bless,
God bless you too, buddy. All right, we'll go to area code 303 next in Colorado. You're live on the Hagman and Hagman Report. What's on your mind? 303? All right, we'll come back to you. 661. 661, you're up next. You're live on the Hagman and Hagman Report. What's on your mind tonight? Okay.
Yeah, I think you might have said me, Joe.
Oh, yeah, you know what? I apologize. Glad you got a question, Dad.
Yeah, I do. Well, you know, I didn't get a chance to hear the first hour. And by the way, I just want to say again how lucky the audience is to have both Walid and his son. What a great team. Thank you so much, both of you. And Walid, you probably did. You know what, Walid, you probably don't remember this, but our first interview was on the Roth show many years ago when I was first introduced to you. And I'll tell you something. What a fantastic first interview that was, and I learned so much from you. And to all anyone, and I feel it's on my heart to say this because I know that you fight the fight every day. And I know that you've got a lot of detractors out there that are coming actually from within our own government. And I've got to say this: we're all fighting that fight. And folks, Mr. Walid Shoebat and his son, they're the real deal. And trust me when I say this, they're on the front lines of battle. So you know what? There is no question in there except to say, just thank you so much and keep on keeping on. Go ahead and go to someone who does have a question.
Appreciate it.
All right, sorry about that. We upgraded our studio Skype account, and he actually is using that, so he had to call in as a guest, and I didn't recognize the number. That's pretty funny. All right, we're going to go to caller, area code unknown. You're live on the Hagman and Hagman Report.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Just a moment, please.
Claire?
Just a moment, please.
Okay.
Hello.
Not
I wanted to thank you guys for all the services you do to the world. And I want to thank the host and the guest, Mr. Shoebat. I listen to you guys at least once a week. But my question is to Mr. Shoebat. Is Saudi Arabia Babylon or is America?
There is no reference anywhere in the Bible about America being Babylon. The only reference I would suspect would be about America, and that is the greatest of nations, or the most terrible of the nations in battle, that is. So I don't know how could somebody conclude the United States is America. Let's take a look at Jeremiah when he talks about the destruction of Babylon. It's at the Red Sea. America is not by the Red Sea. Even if you look at the imports, why would the shipmasters weep and wail? They weep and wail for no one buys their merchandise anymore. In other words, the result of the destruction of Babylon will basically stop what the shipmasters of the sea, who's weeping and wailing, alas, alas, that great city, that city was buying their goods. It is not what that city exports, it's what that city imports. So if you look at the imports that are in the Bible of that city, it matches perfectly Saudi Arabia, including slaves, including liquor, wine, including silk, including chariots, cars, including marble, including spices, sheep, goats, so on and so forth, horses. Those are not American major imports. So then we look at many, many parts of the Bible. In fact, it'll take 4 hours at least just to go over the issues of where the Bible talks about this Babylon is. And there is absolutely no reference to it. Why are Americans wanting to be Babylon? It just behooves me. Why not England? Why not France? If the harbinger is correct that America is an extension of Israel, well, excuse me, America is an extension of Great Britain. It's not an extension of Israel. America is the first Christian country. That's false. Armenia is the first Christian country. In fact, if I had a debate with Mr. Khan, I'll Swiss cheese his whole book. It's filled with errors, plagued with misconceptions, and this is the part what I don't understand. American evangelical community lack understanding history, and that's the major problem. Easterners know history a lot better, and we look at these things and we laugh. America, God bless America, it's been blessed with great weaponry. So we will provide the knowledge of Bible and history, and you will provide the weapons to destroy the Antichrist. Thank you very much. So we need to understand that this is absolutely a myth, that America is Babylon. It doesn't make any sense. The New York City, what is it? The Statue of Liberty with the garland, that's the kind of the horn sticking out of the heads of the beast. It doesn't make any sense. New York City has many Jews living in New York City. Why would the one of God destroy the Jews in New York City? The majority of Jewish population in the world, besides Israel, is New York City. So is New York City the heart of it? It doesn't make, none of these things make any sense. What people do is they look at similarities, but what they ignore is the differences. There are many differences between America and Babylon in the Bible.
What nation then do you believe will be destroyed in 1 hour?
Well, it'd be Arabia. In fact, just go to any Bible search engine and search the word Arabia. Search the word Dumma, which is in Arabia. Search the name Kedar, which is in Arabia. Search where Christ destroys Arabia, Habakkuk chapter 3. He comes to destroy Midian. Midian is the brother of Ishmael in Arabia. So I can go on and on of naming you Arab cities. Look at Isaiah chapter 30, where Edom. Look at Ezekiel 25. Edom is from Dedan, from Yemen, which is Timan, to Dedan. That is the heart of the Arab world in the Red Sea. So the Red Sea is even mentioned in the Bible. Where is the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean mentioned in the Bible? Answer: nowhere. In fact, you do not find any threat to Israel coming from the West. The Antichrist and the whole escapade of Antichrist, the North, the South, and the East, the only thing is missing is the West. Why? The West is preserved. So many began to look at the West as this great Satan, exactly as the Muslims would view the West as the great Satan. So what is the difference between someone who believes America is the great Satan and the West is the Antichrist versus the Muslim? Not much difference whatsoever. So why are we adapting to Muslim theology and Muslim thinking when we proclaim ourselves as Christians? God bless America. It's not mentioned in instruction in the Bible. Will God make us persevere? Will God punish America? Will God? Of course, God will refine the nations He wants to refine. So those things happen as refinement to America. If we go through a depression, those will refine America. They will make us come back as a much better nation than before.
Okay, well, we're going to move on to another caller. Joe, bring in the next person.
All right. We're going to go to area code 808. You're live on the Hagman and Hagman Report.
Hey,
what's your question, caller?
Hi, aloha. It's Quiet Guy calling.
Hey.
Can you hear me? Hey, yeah.
Yes,
aloha.
we can.
I have a couple of questions and a comment for Walid, I guess. First of all, does he recognize that the House of Israel as the British Commonwealth, which I could ramble on a long time about that, and about what he can contribute to about, I don't know, I agree that the man of sin, the man of perdition is going to be the Arabian, referred to a couple of times obscurely in the Old Testament, and the House of Saud being established by a renegade Jew, which I kind of suspect might be the root, the source. And my comment is about I'll tell you what, Professor Walter Veith, he's a Seventh-day Adventist, but nevertheless, he makes a really excellent case for Islam being perpetuated, established by the Vatican by his 40-year-old Catholic widow wife. And if you put a cathedral and a mosque next to each other, they all have exactly identical Babylonian symbolism. You know, the sun and the moon. This speaks for itself. All the identical Babylonian symbolism in a mosque and in a cathedral. And
anyway, I'll answer the last question or the last comment that the caller made. Walt, I'm very familiar with the work of Walter Veith. In fact, I watched his whole lecture and all that. And what I want to say is that he provides no concrete evidence that the Vatican ever established Islam. If the caller was listening earlier, I gave just on the surface, the refutation that I have against this idea. Again, there's no evidence that Muhammad's wife was a Catholic. And this whole idea of cathedrals and mosques being the same, well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for some of the similarities that we see between the two. That's because Muslims were too uneducated to make up their own architecture. And so when they invaded these Christian countries like Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, which were Catholic, these were Catholic nations, when the Muslims invaded them, they took over the churches and made them mosques. So of course you're going to find similarities, because when you steal a building that's not yours, and then you, of course, the stolen building is going to have similarities with the one who originated the design.
One of the largest mosques was a church in Cordova, Masjid Walid Abd al-Malik. It was a church. So yeah, sure, you're going to see the mosque looking like a church, because in Cordova, when they invaded Spain, they converted the church into a mosque.
But let me also ask, is the caller still there? Oh, he's not there. Okay, so...
Nevertheless, the Inquisition is perpetuated, and it serves exactly the purpose of getting rid of all the infidels. You know, Islam.
What was wrong with the Inquisition, though? Hold on, what was wrong with the Inquisition, though?
What was wrong with the Inquisition? Getting rid of infidels. Getting rid of the infidels.
Who were but what was wrong?
The true word of God.
Hold on. But have you ever heard of the Morisco Revolt?
Of the what?
It's when the Morisco Revolt took place in the early 16th century. But you've never heard of the Morisco Revolt.
The what revolt?
Morisco Revolt happened in the 1520s. Morisco Revolt, when after the Spaniards retook all of Spain from the Muslim occupation, the Spanish Catholics were under the occupation of the Muslims for 800 years. So it was an 800-year struggle. When they finally got their nation in the 15th century, in the 1520s, the Moors, or the North Africans, revolted and tried to retake Spain, and they ended up taking all of southern Spain. So there had to be an inquisition to make sure who was Muslim and who was not. And if you were Muslim, you were executed. Do I blame the Spaniards? Of course not. If America was invaded for 800 years, America would do worse things than the Spaniards. So this whole idea that the Inquisition was wrong, well, let me tell you something. Nations don't exist without inquisitions. A nation cannot survive without an inquisition. Ancient Israel had inquisitions. God told Moses to make an inquisition on idol worshippers and heretical Hebrews who had to be stoned to death. So the idea, America had inquisitions during World War II against the Japanese. America had inquisitions during when America was concerned about communism. After 9/11, America did an inquisition on Muslims in America. So a nation cannot survive without inquisitions. In fact, Protestant Germany had inquisitions. In fact, there were more people killed in Protestant countries than in Catholic Spain or in Catholic Italy. In fact, during the Spanish Inquisition, where did the majority of the Jews flee? The majority of the Jews fled to Rome, to the Vatican, because the popes opened their door to the Jews. In fact, there was a saying in that time period that Rome was the land of the Jew, because that's where the Jews fled. So this whole idea of the Spanish Inquisition, well, every nation has inquisitions. What's wrong with, some people need killing. Ever think about that? America has killed people. Israel has killed people. What's wrong with killing evil people? Paul tells us that the governor does not hold the sword in vain. He is a terror to the evildoers. And Peter, in 1 Peter 2:14, says that governors are appointed by God to punish evildoers and to reward righteousness. So what is wrong if a nation kills people who deserve killing? I don't understand this.
Well, that's a very good comment. I do have a bunch of emailed in questions. I'm just going to shoot you a couple of ones, and then we've got to take some more calls. What is Walid's opinion on Obama admitting that Libya is worse as a result of his policies by closing the U.S. embassy there? Any quick thoughts on that, Walid?
Well, I mean, the whole thing with Obama blaming the movie and so on and so forth. Benghazi was attacked by terrorists. And, of course, we know that Benghazi was involved by Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which President Obama also supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. We forget the first, what the government stated when Benghazi first happened. It was Ansar al-Sharia, Muslims in Egypt. In fact, the Libyan government declared that it was Ansar al-Sharia of Egypt. So it was involving the Muslim Brotherhood as well, which President Obama had supported for a long time. In fact, he wanted the release of what's his name, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, was President. I forgot his name. It's just I'm having a senior moment here. But Benghazi was a failure also from the basically not purchasing a secure location for the Americans who were working there. It was a whole fiasco in which Obama also, they're just pointing at French fries, small fries, if you will, when it comes to the culprits behind Benghazi. There is the Jamal Network also was involved in that same group, in the same team that blew a hole in Benghazi in the past. So it's an array of things. In fact, many Islamists were copied in those emails regarding the smoking gun, things that we exposed. Al-Hassani was one of them, one of the assistants to President Obama. Islamists is even right there in the White House working with President Obama and getting the emails about Benghazi, like Al-Hassani, whom we exposed. So, Obama is a failure in everything he has done. In fact, if the thing about the medical care and all that stuff fails, there's nothing Obama has accomplished. Most people are so afraid of what Obama is going to do. Everybody, if you look at the media, Obama. I'm not so much worried about Obama. Obama's going to come and go. I do worry about some of the things he does, of course. But I'm not worried about his success rate. His success rate has been a doomsday failure. It is not going to affect much in the future of America. So, I do not worry about these things, and I move on. Obama is not my major concern. My major concern is what he does with the Islamists and how he basically destroyed Libya and how he basically tried to destroy Egypt. But thank God Egypt came back, and how he supported the Mujahideen in the Free Syrian Army in Syria. Bashar al-Assad is not the greatest guy in the world, but sure, do you want Bashar al-Assad or do you want the Khilafah in Syria? I prefer to have Bashar al-Assad. Right. At least Jews and Christians in Syria live in freedom, under Bashar al-Assad.
That's a really good point. Excellent. 502, what is your question? 502 area code.
Okay, is that me? Yes, must be me.
That is you, sir.
I've got a question for Wally. His wife is Catholic, right? So that when he married her, he did become Catholic. So is he one-sided on the Catholic religion? And
am I in the witness stand here, having to kind of swear oath and answer everything as far as my wife and me and my family? My wife, of course, she was Mexican American. Of course, she was born and raised Catholic. So, but what does that have to do with anything? Are you saying I'm a Jesuit spy?
What is the actual question?
I get all these accusations that Walid Shoebat is a Jesuit spy. I laugh at these things.
Caller, what is your point of asking us this question?
502, do you want to go ahead and answer their question, please? He's kind of fading out. Do you want to turn your radio down, sir, and re-ask the question, please? Or maybe not. Okay. Well, anyway, I think the point is, like I said, I'm just going to cut off people that aren't going to actually get to their point or ask a question. And I think whether your wife was Catholic or whatever the case,
we write
pretty
articles. When the Pope does something good, we write articles complimenting him, like rescuing a lady
Miriam
Ibrahim from Sudan. When the Catholic Pope does bad, we write articles ridiculing him. People rarely read the ridicule articles.
People love to read the ridicule articles, but they never like to read the articles where we say something good about him.
And if they do, then they say, oh, why would you support the Pope? Or why would you... Well, we have to look at the right in the Catholic history. For example, has it not been for the Battle of Poitiers by Catholics, all Europe would have been Muslim. And we have to look at the Battle of Lepanto. There was a mistake done by the Protestants in the Battle of Lepanto in which they stood with the Muslims. In fact, there was many Protestants who died fighting the Catholic alliance in the Battle of Lepanto, which is the greatest naval battle in Christian history. The Catholic alliance finally defeated the Muslims. So if the Catholics did something right, why don't we talk about it? It's rarely ever mentioned when the Catholics do good things, and we keep talking about the Catholic when they do wrong things. Well, we have to look at the log in our own eye before we pick at the speck of our Catholic brother. Now, having said that, the listener would start a machine gun about issues with Catholicism,
pedophiles.
This is not the essence of our topic here, but the essence of our topic is history. Whether it was Catholic, whether it was Protestant who did righteous things, we must recognize these things.
Absolutely. And what was your thought, Theodore, when the Pope was calling for it seemed to be he's really getting into the one world religion thing, isn't he, right now?
Well, the Vatican has been playing politics with Islam for quite some time, going all the way back to the 1960s. But nonetheless, while the Vatican has a lot of corruption in it, a ton of corruption in it, with its sympathies toward the Islamic religion, going all the way back to the Vatican II Council and all that. But with that said, we cannot ignore history. The fact that the first battles between Christian and Muslim was fought between Muslim and Catholic, the Crusades. How the Crusaders were all Catholic, how they were fighting the Muslims for 200 years. And then you can go further than that. You can go all the way to like my father said, the Battle of Lepanto, but we also have the Battle of
Vienna.
Well, not just the Battle of Vienna, but we also have the Battle of Belgrade when Saint Capistrano helped lead an army to defeat the Muslims. I mean, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of battles that were fought between Catholic and Muslims for centuries. And all of a sudden in the 1960s, the Catholics begin to kiss up to Islam, and then all of a sudden the Catholic Church is the harlot of Babylon all of a sudden. Well, hold on a second. You're ignoring over 1,000 years, or actually almost 2,000 years, of Catholic-Muslim wars. I mean, and I believe that these wars cannot be ignored. To ignore these wars is to ignore the war that we are in now, is what I believe. Because essentially our war is not secular, it's spiritual. And the spiritual war is between not just humans, not just between human beings, but between cosmos, as Chesterton said, and between demons and angels. And I believe that when the Catholic Church and the Muslims were having these many, many battles and wars with Muslims, what was happening was not just a battle between sword and scimitar, but between the city of God and the city of Satan.
Amen. Well, Walid and Theodore, we're approaching the top of the hour, and I must say these 3 hours just flew by. And I really want to thank you, fellas, for the work that you do. And again, I really do want to encourage our listeners to please support Walid Shoebat Ministries. Folks, you can go to shoebat.com. I've got it linked in. If you go to weekendvigilante.com, it's linked under his name on the July 26th show. And any final thoughts, Walid, as we go to, we've got a couple of minutes to wrap it up. What are your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts, we need to focus really on what is happening in Turkey. Turkey, in essence, where the caliphate will revive. We have to look at the essence of Christianity and what Christ wants us to do. And that we must remain busy fighting the fight, running the marathon till the end, and not basically give up. America is a nation that is a fighting nation. I like to look at General Patton, and his attitude about America and about the enemy. We need to go back to those attitudes and how we fight this threat and by exposing it and standing together, regardless of our denominational differences. There are rights and wrongs in all denominational differences. We should argue our differences always, because that's how we reach to the truth. We're not a nation that burns Qur'ans and burns even Nazi books. We study them so we can understand the nature of the beast that we are fighting. We need to understand the enemy by studying the enemy, and that's how we can defeat the enemy.
Absolutely agree. Well, Joe and Doug, final thoughts.
I want to say thank you to both Walid and his son. It has been a fantastic show, so informative. I already have an inbox full of compliments and thank yous, and God bless you both. Thank you for what you do, and
God bless
continue
you.
the good work.
Godspeed.
Thank you. Godspeed.
Well, folks, that was a barn burner. I wish everyone, again, would please go to the website. Please support the work they're doing with persecuted Christians. And again, tune in every Saturday, of course, 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, the Weekend Report. We look forward to so much good information that people are sending in to Joe, Doug, and I, and just incredible the kind of guests you want. Please do tell us what kind of episodes. And don't forget to like us on all the social media. Tune in next time when we're back, same bat place, same bat time, Weekend Vigilante and the Hagmans teaming up, as everyone knows, for the weekend.